Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
A warm breeze was blowing through the open balcony windows, and the full moon illuminated the entire space. Vanessa was sitting on a small warm blanket, and her eyes filled with tears. It had been exactly 1 month since her young husband had left her. Not even a day had passed since their wedding, and she had already discovered that her new hubby had managed to get a mistress before they were married. O was sitting gazing at the moonspots, the full moon clearly visible tonight, and she was holding a photograph in her hands, the same photograph from her wedding. Vanessa seemed to have already melted into that photo, for she had never been separated from it since her divorce. She looked at the photo again with tear-filled eyes, and the tears welled up again. So happy, so beautiful. Who would have told her that it would all end like this, or that she would catch her spouse for treason just on her wedding day? The young man was hotly kissing another, hiding with her in the gentleman's room of the restaurant, where the wedding feast was being held. More importantly, he was not only kissing a stranger. She was kissing Vanessa's best friend, the friend Vanessa had offered to be a witness at her wedding. The friend Vanessa was proud to call her best and closest friend. She looked at Luna again. Contemplating the image of herself and her former lover was beyond her. Of course, when Andrew, Vanessa's husband, was caught red-handed, she began to recant. It was all her. She did not want to hang around my neck until the end. Even in the gentleman she came. Screaming young man. Screaming in her heart, screaming. So there was no doubt in the mind of the young lady. Probably not her fault. It was all her. She had seduced him. Naively thought Vanessa, and of course, forgave him. The wedding took place, and it never crossed none of the guests' minds that there was a third person lurking in the newlyweds' relationship. A happy family life never came together. After only 5 days, Andrew confessed his passion for another woman and asked for a divorce. Why did he marry me? Vanessa kept repeating the question over and over again. Why did he have to marry me? Why did he lie that it wasn't his fault? Was there an answer to these questions, or would she never find one? She rose from her chair and leaned against the windowsill, breathing in the cool night air. He put his hand to his chest. She wore a pendant around her neck. It was a pendant Andrew had given her before they were married. She touched the jewel and smiled involuntarily through her tears. Maybe all was not yet lost, she thought. After all, he never took his gift from me. The pendant had its own story, interesting and even frightening. Andrew had inherited it from his great-grandmother. The large diamond pendant was worth an unprecedented amount of money. Andrew's great-grandmother managed to save it during the Civil War. The Andrew family came from a maternal line of nobles, and this pendant was the only thing that reminded her of her relative's former wealth, although his relatives could have sold it long ago. Perhaps the proceeds could have been used to buy a couple of apartments in the city center. But Andrew and his parents respected their roots, as these jewels were inherited only by women. Andrew's mother insisted that the pendant pass into her hands. At their wedding, the young people had maintained a friendly and then closer relationship for many years, since adolescence. No one doubted their love for each other, or was she spinning a jewel between their hands? The image of Andrew immediately surfaced in the memories. What a dear favorite, she thought wistfully for the umpteenth time. How could he do this to me? In the girl's head did not fit everything that had happened. She didn't understand why he had left her and why she had left with her best friend. Kelly had been Vanessa's best friend since kindergarten. The girls grew up together, developed together, and even the parents of the boys' girlfriends were friends with each other. Kelly had watched Vanessa and Andrew's relationship begin. She had seen how they had fallen in love, how they had dreamed of getting married and having children. Why had she had her eye on him? After all, there had always been plenty of men around. The double betrayal was harder to bear than it might seem at first glance. After her short-lived marriage and hasty divorce, Vanessa had lost herself. She had lost everything she held so dear. Still so young, she didn't know how to move on, how to learn to trust someone again. She let go of the pendant. She looked at the photo again. Her eyes glistened with tears again. Or was she about to throw herself back on the bed, choking back sobs? After all, for the entire month since her divorce, all she had been able to do was cry. She stepped out onto the balcony and headed for her room when suddenly the doorbell rang loudly. And not just any doorbell, it was literally crowded. Vanessa looked at the clock, which read exactly 2 o'clock. Her heart pounded to the beat of the knocking on the door. Her head suddenly ached from the unexpected and annoying sobriety of the call. Maria, the girl's mother, peeked into the parents' room. Or what was wrong? "Are you sleepy?" she asked. "Tie your robe." The woman yawned. In truth, the frozen fear in her eyes betrayed excitement. Who was it? Who could it have come to this? "Andrew?" Vanessa exclaimed, without calling my mother to finish the sentence. She was bouncing in place like a little girl getting a new toy. Interrupted by the insistent 3 chimes of the doorbell. "It's Andrew. He's come to make amends." "I knew it. I knew this would happen." Mary flinched as she heard another knock on the door. She lowered her voice, looked puzzled at her daughter Vanessa. "Shut up. What, Andrew? He has a new love now. Forget it, please." Once again, she couldn't finish the sentence. The insistent ringing of the doorbell and the pounding of fists on the door were terrifying. The woman became entangled in her robe, her hands trembling with fear. She grabbed her daughter's hand without opening it. "We don't know who it is. It's Andrew," cried Vanessa, coming back from her mother's arms. She ran to the door, not letting go of the photograph from her hands at her mother's screams. She, without even looking through the peephole, hurried to open the door insistently for that visitor, who was flying by. The girl, contemplating the face of the man who had arrived, her hands trembled with renewed vigor. When she realized that another person had arrived, the man entered the apartment with a confident stride. He was followed by 3 other strangers or males and 3 neighbors known to the family on the landing. The first man squared his shoulders, reached into his pockets, and shoved a square of cardboard in the girl's face. "Vanessa, here lives the operative, Police Captain Benjamin." He opened a booklet confirming his identity. "I have a warrant to search your apartment." Vanessa was speechless. She looked at the people who had come to see her. What exactly was going on? The girl didn't understand. Maria immediately stood behind her back. What was wrong with her? "Worried?" asked the woman. "On what grounds do you want to search us?" The man smiled and put a document in the hands of Vanessa's mother. The woman looked at it quickly. Then she looked at Vanessa's daughter. "It says here that you are a thief." She barely spoke in a voice that Vanessa seemed on the verge of fainting. "She's a thief. She has to be. There must be some mistake." As the young woman tried to come to herself and realize exactly what she might be guilty of, the men entered unceremoniously. Starting to turn everything upside down, they covered everything. Shelf after shelf and drawer after drawer were opened, shaking and tossing books. They trampled dirty boots, shields, carpets. With absolutely no regard for any standards of decency, they shamelessly opened cupboards and overturned and threw all their contents on the floor. Even the fridge was carelessly tossed, with perfectly good, fresh food on the floor. Vanessa didn't know what to think. Every once in a while she tried to catch her mother's eye, but she looked away, then looked questioningly at her neighbor. Maybe she could explain something to her. The neighbor? The kindly old woman in her 60s nodded and walked a couple of steps away. "Oh, Velichko," began the old woman in a whisper. "How can that be? You're a good girl, but why do you need that jewel?" Vanessa narrowed her eyes. "What are you talking about? I don't understand anything. I'm so nervous. What's going on?" The neighbor opened her mouth but didn't have time to say anything. "I understand," shouted the man who had come in. "It is necessary." The old woman nodded and returned to the company. Or was she thinking about jewelry? She, like her mother, continued to dutifully follow the search. Watching in horror at the mess they were making when they had already rummaged through almost the entire floor and obviously hadn't found anything worthwhile. Vanessa raised a shaky voice. "What are you looking for? What are you looking for? I didn't steal or anything," she said, trying to silence the trembling in her voice. "Where are the jewels, Citizen Vanessa?" asked one of the agents, looking sternly into the girl's eyes. He seemed to be trying to read something in them. He averted his gaze to Vanessa's mother. He looked at her judiciously. "Maria, aren't you ashamed of yourself for raising a thief?" she asked defiantly. From indignation, the woman lost the power of speech and stammered. Yes, you. I would never do that," she repeated, reaching with her voice. Vanessa smiled to herself, noting with amazement. He is an excellent psychologist. She looked at her mother again and realized bitterly that she could not be expected to support her. Maria was the kind of person who valued public opinion more than anything else in the world, and when she learned that her daughter might be a thief, she literally turned green. If Vanessa turned out to be a crook, her mother would have no problem giving her up. "Why would I want a daughter like that?" Aloud, Maria kept making excuses. "I raised her to be a good and kind person. I didn't teach her to steal. It's not my fault. She's completely crazy with her Andres," she shouted. Vanessa unconsciously looked at the photograph she still held in her hand. This action immediately attracted the attention of the policeman. "What is this?" asked Captain Benjamin, stepping forward. He abruptly snatched the photograph from her hands. Vanessa was stunned. She couldn't remember herself without the photo. The captain looked at the photo and then looked carefully into the girl's eyes. "What do you want pictures of this man for?" he asked sternly. "Do you wish him harm?" His gaze swept over Vanessa's face. "He is my husband," she shouted, holding her hands to her chest, as if instinctively defending herself from the unexpected aggression. "The ex is your ex-husband," the policeman corrected her. How did he suddenly catch a glimpse of the girl's neck? He shouted and pulled her hand towards the frightened Vanessa. "You haven't had time to resent it." She as the man ripped off the pendant with a sharp movement, tearing the chain around her neck. He raised his hand victoriously with the pendant. "I found it," he shouted victoriously. "Let the witnesses record it. Have you seen it all?" The people concerned nodded their heads, and Vanessa's mother squeezed her heart. The man looked at Vanessa critically. "I thought you were smarter to at least hide it. I would have guessed it was stolen merchandise. And you?" She turned around and waved her hand at him. "Stupid. Or did the protesters wave their hands?" No. This pendant was given to Andrew by my husband. Ask him, his mother. Ask him," she screamed, and shame on her for lying. One of the policemen spoke up. "This pendant belongs to Kelly. According to our records, she's currently Andrew's fiancée. Did you steal it?" Captain Benjamin looked menacingly at his employee. He was silent for a moment. Benjamin muttered in a muffled tone, turning to Vanessa and mechanically repeating endless sentences. "Citizen Vanessa, you are a suspect in a grand theft case. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. You have the right to an attorney. In the absence of an attorney, you will be provided with a public defender. Be prepared. You must follow us to the investigation department. Bring your passport, a change of underwear, and personal hygiene items. You may bring your own cup and spoon. Everything else will be given to you by your relatives according to the approved list of things authorized for transfer. Hurry up," he added in another harsh, arrogant tone. He elbowed poor Vanessa in the back. 2 minutes to get ready. She had no choice but to do as she was told. It was like a blur. One last look at her mother. Mom screamed under her breath, and I did it. You know it wasn't my fault. Maria, she lifted her chin. "You're not my daughter anymore," she said in a cold, judgmental tone. It was at that moment that Vanessa realized that from now on she was on her own. This was how she had been sent to jail for nothing. It turned out that Kelly had been her best friend. Vanessa filed a complaint against her. And not only did she file a complaint, she had to provide irrefutable proof of the embezzlement, as it was written by the police and then in court. Kelly, without batting an eyelash, claimed that Vanessa had allegedly blatantly stolen the very expensive pendant, or incidentally, a pendant given to her by her everyday husband. Kelly charged that the pendant had allegedly come to her as a gift following the dissolution of Vanessa and Andrew's marriage. And Vanessa went to the friend's apartment, made a fuss, and, taking advantage of the general commotion, made off with valuable jewelry. As proof of the separation brought a video in which Vanessa entered the apartment of the best friend. Nothing would have happened. But that day, Kelly herself called Vanessa at her apartment. They were still friends, or not. In any case, Vanessa had already suffered a terrible double betrayal and had been brutally framed. Basely and shabbily framed by those she trusted the most in the world. The girl had no money for a lawyer. After all, her mother, as well as the rest of the family, had abandoned Vanessa. They seemed to have forgotten about her once and for all. They decided that the criminal could no longer be their relative. So they had no problem cutting the poor girl out of their lives. And Vanessa was left alone, abandoned, betrayed, unwanted by the lawyer provided by the state. He didn't do his job, and Vanessa was sentenced to 6 years in a minimum security penal colony. In court, she tried to justify herself, tried to prove her innocence, but all to no avail. During endless proceedings, the judge would not even listen to her. And in the case, there was more than enough evidence against her. Somehow another proof of her guilt appeared. An unknown witness of Vanessa's had appeared who had seen her running away from the stolen pendant all the way home. How was it possible to realize that a person was running with a small stolen piece of jewelry? How could one realize that it was stolen if you don't even see the jewelry? In short, Vanessa had suffered a crushing defeat. Jail was not something she could avoid. At the end of the trial, she was quickly transferred from the remand center to a colony not far from her hometown. Vanessa had no support, money, or energy left for the rest of her life. When she learned of the final court decision, Vanessa realized that her existence had lost all meaning. Thoughts of suicide began to visit her unstoppably. However, she still managed to hold on to the desire to live. Vanessa had set herself a clear and important goal: to find out who the unknown witness was. To get out of here, find out, and get revenge. Revenge on all those who had so cruelly and ruthlessly trampled on her life. In case that was worth finding out too. So you decided to live. What's wrong with you? Asked a large adult woman is sick. Then you need to go to the hospital. The woman stepped back, away from Vanessa. It was one of her cellmates. Fortunately, Vanessa had no problem in this scary community. What was she so afraid of? Look, no Russian. In such a place you cannot show your weakness. Her new comrades told her. After hearing the story of the arrival of the newcomer, Vanessa answered the question about her well-being, trying to put on the most friendly smile. I think I have poisoned myself a little. I think the porridge they gave us yesterday must have gone bad. How do you think you're feeling? I don't know. I'm all right, I guess, she said. Her name was Emily, and she had been in prison for almost 3 years. In Vanessa, the woman could see her daughter, for she was almost a lifetime older. As soon as this frail little girl appeared, Emily took her under her massive, and she did not allow anyone to offend the newcomers. This tall, burly, red-haired woman was always helping the unfortunate. Of course, she was no match for them. After all, she had no knowledge of life in the colony. Emily herself was serving time under the same article as Vanessa for robbery. True, Emily committed her crime, and she wasn't ashamed of it at all. She once worked as a programmer and managed to hack into the bank account of a large company where she worked. All the stolen money Emily transferred to the account of one of the private orphanages. After all, she knew very well that the company made its profits completely illegally. However, law enforcement authorities failed to appreciate such an ability, and Emily was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Emily gave Vanessa a stern look. Maybe you're right. My stomach is used to this food. Yours is not yet so strong. It's true that she is pale and yellow-green. You should see a doctor. Honey, you should. Repeated Vanessa. She had the last word. I'm getting worse and worse. Vanessa was taken for a medical examination. The doctor, after seeing the finished tests, came to Vanessa's room, very disturbed by the vision. He examined the patient and took another look at the sick list. Are you aware of what is happening to you? Asked the doctor in a concerned tone. How could you have missed something like this? Vanessa staggered out of the room. What's weak? She asked. I've been poisoned. I just have a weak stomach. Not in a harsh tone. Vanessa's doctor replied. Are you pregnant, or did you just get out of the hospital bed? Colorful spots popped in my eyes. Inside, everything twisted with a new bout of nausea. From what? She immediately looked down at her stomach and wondered. How could she have missed something like that? Had a crazy idea crossed her mind? Or did she look questioningly at the doctor? Are you sure? Of course, the woman replied confidently. Do you even know who the father is? Vanessa was offended. Who does he think I am? Of course I know. I've only had one man, my husband. But I'm not interested. When you give birth, you will give the children to the father if there is one. Or already was. She wanted to start explaining to this disgruntled woman that she was divorced, and that in fact, the father of her future children had fraudulently put her in jail. For suddenly she almost fell off her bunk from astonishment and shock. Okay, stop, children. You mean yes, Vanessa replied in a calmly nonchalant tone. Are you expecting triplets? Vanessa's whole life seemed to flash before her eyes. She thought she was about to end her existence. Are you kidding? How is that possible? Crushed, she hugged herself and rocked sitting up. Just a little more. And she's doing her voice. So already life is ruined. It's the worst. And then there's 3 kids. I could go and hang myself, honestly. I have nothing to do but joke with the prisoners. Not without squeamishness, the doctor replied. How can I get in touch with the father of her children? Vanessa, we are divorced, she replied. I don't think it's possible to give the children to him. And I don't want to. Aya, I'm going to have an abortion. You're not having an abortion here. The doctor told her matter-of-factly. You're going to give birth as a baby. You don't have to. They'll put you in an orphanage. A brutal November day. During the night, the prisoner Vanessa gave birth to 3 tiny, weak, premature babies in terrible agony. Immediately after the births, which took place in the colony's own internment center, they were separated from their mother and taken to a specialized maternity ward, which is part of the prison system of the Penitentiary Department of the Federal Penitentiary Service. To everyone's surprise, all 3 survived and returned to the colony where their mother was. Vanessa spent 2 weeks in the hospital. Valeria had a fever. No one needed her, and with inflammation of the uterus, she was taken to another clinic. When it became clear that her case was a disaster. Helped all the same Emily, who raised a terrible fuss, threatening to pass through his lawyer to the appropriate complaint about the conditions of detention of sick prisoners. Having come to her senses after the operation, which she had undergone urgently, Vanessa reconsidered its attitude to these children and did not write an application for their abandonment. Understand, you will never have the opportunity to have your own children again. She was convinced by another doctor, kind and considerate, unlike the one who had been indifferent and dismissive to Vanessa in the colony. Think about it. Life is unpredictable. One day it's black, the next day it's clear, and you won't have other children. But how will I raise them? Vanessa cried. I have nothing else. Even my own mother abandoned me, and you say that's a plus. It's up to you. The doctor shook her head. But if I were you, I wouldn't be so quick to dismiss it when Vanessa and her children are finally strong enough to be discharged from the clinic. The same doctor arranged for them to meet. After seeing her daughters, she had 3 beautiful babies. Or she just couldn't give them up and burst into tears again, seeing how tiny, wonderful, and helpless they were. Gritting her teeth, she decided she would get through it somehow. Don't worry, Emily told her when they saw each other again at the colony. You're the mother of many children now. You'll be released early and you'll get all kinds of benefits from the state. And I won't leave you. I'm in love with you, you fool. She turned away, trying to hide her eyes from them. We'll figure it out. Vanessa hugged her older friend gratefully. Her throat constricted in spasms, preventing her from uttering words of thanks. Of course, the children were housed separately in a room specially designated for such occasions. They're all babies born in the colony were raised with state resources, as in orphanages. Mothers were given a certain amount of time each day to feed the children and interact with them. Vanessa, who survived a difficult birth and subsequent operation, had no milk. But she gave her cats all the tenderness she had lost more than once. The oldest of her sisters, the firstborn, Vanessa named Emily after her cellmate and new friend Helen. She had always liked that name. Long ago, as in another life, when she was still with Andrew, they had dreamed of naming their daughter Helen. Vanessa named her third daughter Betty after Andrew's mother. Vanessa and her mother-in-law had always had a very good relationship. She had a much kinder disposition than Vanessa's mother, and she always showed her future daughter-in-law a touching concern for her. Although Vanessa had no proof that Betty was not implicated in the story of her unjust accusation, somehow she knew for certain that Andrew's mother had had nothing to do with it. Unconscious, weak, based on nothing. But such a nice feeling nestled in the soul of the young mom she knew. She was safe, kind. Betty couldn't have done that to her. Or she could have, flipping the gruesome story back and forth. Vanessa changed her mind every few days. It all seemed so strange. Time passed, the days dragged on, slowly and painfully. Vanessa did not have the most serious article, and the general regime colonies are a much less harsh place than the Strodacha, as the old inmates used to say. But this unjust imprisonment in the colony, it seemed to her a real hard work. Or he counted the days and even hours, dreaming that he would finally get out of prison and could breathe fresh and such a smell of freedom. Worn behind bars, the children, strangely enough, gave Vanessa a gift. The new hope gave her a will to live, a will to develop, to make their lives better and more worthy than hers. She was well aware that she could hardly find a decent job because of her criminal past, but she knew that for the sake of her children she had to cling to this life tooth and claw. Vanessa often thought of her own mother with tears in her eyes. She kept wondering how her mother had been able to abandon her so easily when she herself had become a mother. The questions for Maria came even more, or she didn't understand how she could do that to her children. After the birth of the babies, life seemed to shine with new colors, despite all the negativity and blackness her day-to-day life had become. Now Vanessa was waking up with no tears in her eyes. She had set a new goal. She had found a new meaning to her life. Now the young woman had two constant goals: to raise her children and, of course, to take revenge on her abusers. "You have talent," said Emily with admiration in her voice. She watched Vanessa's work with interest. The women worked together cutting and sewing. And if Emily did her work rather mechanically, without any interest in the work, the latter was fully involved in the labor process. "Thank you," the girl replied. Embarrassed. "I like it too. I like the way it looks. I never thought sewing could be so interesting." "You're the only one who thinks so," Emily replied, with a quick glance at the rest of the workshop. "You see how good it is in prison. You've done what you love and found it," said the woman with a smile on her face. Or a frown. You can say either way. "You're right though. Vanessa'd enjoy being a partner." In her normal life, she never thought working with her hands could be so satisfying, especially after a prison sentence. Studying in high school was out of the question. Vanessa, at her mother's insistence, enrolled in college right out of high school. The girl never liked the major she'd had chosen. No wonder, because her future profession was not chosen by her, but by her mother. Vanessa entered the law school and studied there for the first 2 years. True, as it turned out, the knowledge she acquired did not help her avoid dishonest imprisonment, and she was never really attracted to it. Prospects of becoming a lawyer, Vanessa was more attracted to some freer creative professions. Already at the age of 5, the girl expressed her desire to become a fashion designer, and if the father or supported his daughter, the mother rudely ridiculed her dream. Years later, Vanessa realized that there was no point in arguing with Maria, and there was no support in the form of a father. The girl's parents divorced when she was 10 years old. Unfortunately, she had to give up her own dreams and obey her authoritarian parents. Education cost her a lot, but Maria was adamant. "Either you study where I tell you, or you are not my daughter," she shouted. It's funny, but now Vanessa was completely free to choose her own path. Her mother had given up on her anyway. A pity, of course. She had to endure the restriction of that very freedom under such harsh and even unbearable conditions to be free to choose. Or maybe it was her parents again. He realized for the first time that Maria had always been a kind of unloving woman who did not give her own daughter the attention she deserved. She was an overbearing, unscrupulous woman. And Vanessa, upon reflection, finally realized that her mother's actions were more than expected. And Vanessa's father was also a rather peculiar man. "Hey, Vanessa." Emily planted herself right in front of the girl, waving her palm in front of her face. "I said, have you applied for parole yet?" "Eh? Yes," Vanessa replied, slowly coming back to reality. Right after Vanessa gave birth to her children, Emily gave her the great idea to apply for parole and try to shorten her sentence by having 3 children, as well as good behavior and productive work. "I didn't even have time to tell you," Vanessa said guiltily. "The administration came to see me recently and offered me this option. If all goes well, I'll be able to complete only a third of the entire course." And Vanessa put aside the jacket, to which previously lazily reached the zipper, and she looked carefully at her friend. "What now?" she asked. "How am I supposed to go on living?" Emily glared at her. "What do you mean, how are you supposed to go on living?" She laughed lightly. "You're so young. What's wrong with your head?" Oh hunched her shoulders. "Where am I going to go? I have no one left. I'm alone with 3 children. I have nowhere to take them." "Come on." Emily shook her head patronizingly. "Do you really think your mother won't take you back? So you did your time. What's the big deal? A mother always takes her child back." "Yes, girls." Emily looked questioningly at the other inmates. "Of course she will, of course she will. I would love my daughter even if she killed someone." Another person's voice was heard. Vanessa shook her head. "No, you don't know my mother." "I don't think I can accept the rabbit's daughter." It's okay," said Emily, conciliatory, with her hands in the air. "But your dad, where is he?" Vanessa wondered again. She hadn't seen her father since her parents divorced. At first, she had pounced on him, demanding that her mother let her talk to her father. But she always refused. "He doesn't need you," Maria kept repeating. Over time, Vanessa got used to the idea that she couldn't maintain a relationship with her father. "No, he doesn't care about me either," she said sadly. Emily rubbed her chin thoughtfully. "Well, and the father of your children for no reason." In a curt tone, the girl replied, "He set me up." All right, calm down." Emily laughed. "Then we'll have to figure out how to get back at him." Vanessa was slowly but steadily approaching her target. It seemed that the starting point she needed was very close. Vanessa could breathe. The fresh smell of freedom was very welcome. The girl was well behaved, probably even perfectly better than most of the young women in the colony. She had never smoked in her life and had never been in conflict with other inmates. She always complied with all the demands of the administration with courtesy and compliance. She complied perfectly and even over-complied with the work rule. Vanessa was already 1 year and 8 months old. Her daughters were growing up. Vanessa's sewing skills continued to develop at an accelerated pace. Sometimes strange and even frightening thoughts would come to her mind. From time to time, Vanessa realized that she felt much better in prison than at home. Here she had made real, loyal friends. Here she saw her children for the first time, kissed each of her daughters for the first time, breathed in the smells of their little bodies for the first time. Here he could finally do something he really loved. Here she was able to realize many things, less and less often. Vanessa thought wistfully of Andrew. Of course, she was still choked with resentment, but not with such a terrible and overflowing force. Time passed, and she could think of him without tears in her eyes. But one of the questions that had tormented her remained unanswered. Why did he do this to me, she thought. Why did he want me to go to jail? She didn't understand her ex-husband's purpose. His reasons for doing something so despicable to her. And Kelly, what was she missing? Why would he do something so despicable to someone so close to her? Vanessa couldn't let the situation go. Not only couldn't, she didn't want to. Her thirst for revenge was growing, her gaze a red, throbbing veil. When she thought of how she would take revenge on her assailants, her blood ran cold in her veins, and her heart pounded, as if some happy event was coming very soon. Thoughts of revenge gave him strength. They illuminated her thorny path. Why were you asking or turning your head sideways? Don't you want to get out of here? My girl Emily stretched out her arms as usual. Of course, I want to get out of here, but I have slightly different circumstances. What are those circumstances? Vanessa looked slyly at her friend. Do you have any secrets from me? Emily laughed. She's too little for that kind of talk. We'll talk about it later. How can I be away without you? Vanessa asked sadly, changing her playful tone. I wish we could go out together. I wish we could be together. It's not over yet, honey, Emily said good-naturedly, pulling out a good cigarette from somewhere. We'll have it all. It had been almost 2 years since Vanessa had been transferred to the correctional facility, and she had begun serving her sentence thanks to her good behavior and the excellent recommendations of the prison authorities. Or was she on parole? She had served exactly 1/3 of her original sentence. Considering her stay in the detention center, sometimes Vanessa would think how fortunate she was to have had her stay in a not at all pleasant place so significantly shortened. However, then she would quickly come back to the reality of this term, and it was not to be with anger. The girl thought, for Vanessa was not at all sure that there was still a place for her in this world, let alone a place for her daughters. For now the girls had to be left at the colony. There was such an opportunity for a short time. Vanessa said goodbye to her daughters with tears in her eyes. It was unbearably painful for her to leave them. But there was no other option. They simply had nowhere to go together. When she finally emerged from the barbed wire of the compound, outside it was burning frost itself. She took a deep breath of the cool, frosty air. It seemed strikingly different here in the wilderness than it had been outside the colony walls. Nonsense, certainly, Vanessa said aloud and smiled at the comparison. Taking a deep breath, her nose felt protected from the cold. She had dreamed of this moment so much. She had imagined it so many times, she had counted the minutes until she was free. And here I am, Vanessa thought. But much to her regret, the first few minutes of freedom did not bring her adequate pleasure. The young mother was still worried about her children. How are they doing without me? Are they okay? Vanessa looked again at the high walls of her recent prison, where she had spent the last 2 years of her life. Her hands trembled treacherously. Her head was pounding. What awaits us, she wondered. Finally, summoning up his courage, he climbed up the authentic, narrow, clear, snow-covered path. Her first destination was the bus stop, from where Vanessa was going to return to her hometown, as she had no other options left. At Emily's insistence, she decided to talk to her mother again. If she could forgive her for something she had not done, and Vanessa, proudly turning her chin, headed resolutely towards the agreed place. The bus, full of silent and very sullen people, had already crossed the city line. Vanessa held her breath. How has everything changed here, she thought, looking anxiously out the window. She wiped herself from time to time. The glass in her palm was sweating with excitement. She watched the faces of the citizens, looked with interest at the buildings flying by, looked at the city as if she was doing it for the first time. The bus had already entered downtown, and Vanessa gasped with joy. Christmas was coming, and everything was decorated with big bright garlands, LED lights, and big Milky toys. The city was brimming with twinkling lights. It was bustling and cheerful. It revealed to the ex-convict her solemn side. Vanessa couldn't contain her emotions. Is it so beautiful? She commented aloud. Shut up, she whispered to a woman sitting behind her, and you're not allowed to sleep here. Vanessa was immediately embarrassed, tucked her head between her shoulders, and fixed her gaze on the window. The bus was stuck in a small traffic jam, and she had a good opportunity to look out the windows of the cars next to her. In each of them there was someone sitting, whether it was a driver alone, a husband and wife, a mother and daughter, children in the back seat. Happy families were on their way somewhere, rushing to buy everything they needed for the upcoming New Year's Eve. O was so engrossed in her simple task that a sudden sharp, continuous sound made her jump in the seat. Her heart beat with renewed vigor. Her mind immediately began to replay memories of the day the unfortunate woman had been held in her mother's apartment. She looked toward the car. With what involuntary alarm? She asked aloud. Good heavens, replied the woman sitting behind her. Calm down, it's just a car honking. A wedding is a wedding. Vanessa looked out the window with renewed interest. Happy people, she thought, trying to calm her racing heart. And she began to search with her eyes for the wedding procession. Finally, the traffic jam cleared and Vanessa saw a cavalcade of expensive white cars decorated with various bridal paraphernalia passing by. What was the strength of the others? Running forward, a smile froze on her face. an ex-convict not long ago, and herself the same. She headed toward the succession of cars that continually signaled her own wedding with a mixture of interest and sadness. She watched the cars go by until she saw the main one. The procession was circling the newlyweds' car when the celebrants in a long white limousine, decorated with silver roses with warriors, branches, and rings with a bell, matched the bus. Vanessa's mouth dropped open in amazement. It was the same car she and Andrew had ridden in for their wedding. She took a quick glance at the memorized number combination of 3/8, dispelling any last doubts. What a coincidence, Vanessa thought. And then she saw him blink. 1 second, one blink. But to the woman it seemed like that very instant. It lasted an eternity. Time stretched out like chewing gum. The newlyweds' car seemed to take forever to overtake the bus. And behind the wheel, Vanessa managed to make out Andrew, handsome and smiling, dressed in a luxurious suit. It was definitely him. He had always loved to drive and had been behind the wheel at his first wedding, and this time he made no exception. And next to him, Kelly in a lush white wedding gown, deep neckline, fur cape, shiny uncle in her hair. Or it seemed that their gazes met, and Andrew noticed her. She thought he had caught her gaze and looked at her as he had once looked at her long, long ago. Vanessa wasn't sure she hadn't imagined that look, but she wanted so badly to believe it. She wanted to feel that he hadn't forgotten her. As if in slow motion, the moment of their meeting poured all thick golden honey over an invisible plate of memories. A shake of the head or the realization that warm feelings for her former fiancé had migrated into a thirst for revenge. The feelings and Vanessa seemed to flare up with renewed vigor. It even seemed to her that Andrew was looking at her with his former warmth. Was he even looking at her? She clutched her head and a throbbing pain settled in her temples. "What's the matter, child?" A worried voice was heard. A woman who had been sitting behind her got up from her seat and approached her. Or was she still holding her head, looking at her feet? "I'm fine." Her head is spinning. She squeezed out a heartbeat. Hers cleared. Her head was spinning more and more. He tried to lift it up, but to no avail. On top of everything else, he also felt nauseous. "Calm down. You're having a panic attack. Take a deep breath. Look at me," in a calm, reassuring voice, the woman told her. Vanessa had time to think that the voice sounded familiar. And then Betty looked at her. The woman held out her hands in surprise. "And Betty, it's you. I didn't recognize you." "Yes." Vanessa was in complete shock. Standing in front of her was her failed mother-in-law, Andrew's mother. She looked at her former relative. How she had changed, Vanessa thought, in the more than 2 years since they had seen each other. Betty seemed to have aged about 10 years. Tired eyes down to the ground and cheeks. Deep wrinkles. "What's the matter? Are you like this?" The girl spoke softly, still holding her head in her hands. "Oh, Vanessa, what has become of you?" The woman asked, ignoring the question. She must have been thinking the same thing as Vanessa herself. Indeed, she had changed a lot. Prison leaves its mark on everyone. "I just got out of juvie today," or shoulder opening. The dizziness disappeared and the resentment and thirst for revenge returned to my heart. "I was in jail. With defiance, I said. Because of your son, because of you. You were the one who insisted I have the pendant. Why did you do it, Vanessa?" The woman quickly interrupted her. "I know, I just couldn't change anything." "Yes," she laughed derisively. "Then why didn't you testify in court? Do you realize what you've done?" Her anger began to rise with renewed vigor. "Why are you doing this to me?" Betty, guilty, lowered her eyes. "I understand. Poor girl." She put a hand on Vanessa's shoulder, but she pulled away abruptly. "Take care of yourself. Don't trust anyone." With those words, Andrew's mother turned and headed for the bus doors. Or did she? "And you're leaving like that," she shrieked, paying no attention to the other passengers. Without explaining herself, she suddenly fell silent, realizing that she had missed some important detail. "Wait, this bus. It's only coming from the colony." "What were you doing in the colony?" "Stuck?" asked Vanessa, not trusting anyone. The woman repeated her words and got off. The doors closed and the bus continued on its way. Vanessa didn't have time to get off after she looked around. Betty had been in the wrong neighborhood. Where was she from, and why was she so different? A sharp rise from her seat made the girl sit back in her chair. Her head was spinning again, nausea creeping up her throat. What the hell is going on, she wondered. But she no longer had the energy to search for an answer. After a couple more stops, a worried Vanessa got out and headed in the direction of her mother's house. She walked through the door and upstairs. A feeling of nostalgia came over her with renewed vigor. It seemed as if the last 2 years had never passed. Vanessa had just run out to the store, and now she was returning home, to the apartment where she had lived most of her life. She stood in front of the door for a few more minutes, shifting from one foot to the other, unable to press the doorbell. Finally, he gathered his strength and rang the doorbell. A second time, a third. When I rang for the 10th time, in desperation, I thought, why won't he open the door? Where am I going to spend the night? And I started pounding on the door with my hands and feet, hoping my mother would open it for me. I am her daughter. I will prove that I am not a thief. She thought and knocked on the door for the last time. When she realized that no one would open the door, Vanessa slowly settled herself by the front door. She didn't know how long she sat there. She lost track of time, but she heard the elevator doors open. And there she was. Maria approached the door with a businesslike air until she realized that Vanessa was sitting on the floor, dead, lost, dressed in old, tattered clothes. The young woman's skin had thickened, her eyes had become harder, and her whole appearance denoted wariness and weariness. In 2 years, Vanessa had begun to look much older. Mary, on the other hand, had blossomed. The woman looked younger. She wore an elegant baggy coat over her shoulders. The skin on her face had stretched and her hands glistened with large, expensive jewels. "Mama," said Vanessa in a low voice. "It was you, Maria, who faltered." And with a sharp movement, she corrected her fur coat. "Girl, I don't know you," she blurted out suddenly. "Mama, Mom, what are you doing?" "It's me," stammered Vanessa. She got up from her seat and held out her hands to her mother. She abruptly removed her palm from her horse. "You want me to talk to bums too?" She shouted and got out of here. "I'll sleep somewhere else. If not, I'll call the police." Vanessa poked her nose out. "Yes, but call them." "I think you've forgotten that I also reside here." With a challenge in her voice, the girl said. Maria smiled slyly. "Only I am registered in my apartment. I am out of here." She thrust her hip at her daughter and began to unlock the apartment with the key. "Mom, it's me. It's your daughter. I don't have any children." The woman replied coldly. She opened the door and rushed inside. A huge iron door slammed shut, literally in front of Vanessa's nose, with blood in her veins. The former detainee froze. Of course, she had thought of all sorts of scenarios. She imagined her mother insulting her, yelling at her, calling her a criminal, demanding an explanation. But what would it be? Vanessa was in shock. Did her mother really not recognize her? Still trying to get home, she pounded her fists on the door again. "Open up," she shouted, with all her might. Or she knew perfectly well how much her mother cared about her reputation, especially in front of the neighbors. She knew she would not allow her name to be slandered in any way. Vanessa kept banging on the door and thinking to herself, "But either let me in, or she'll call the real police. I don't care. I am a resident here. I have a right to be here." The door finally opened again. "Get out of here. I've already called the police," said the woman, holding onto the door with her hands. I looked inside the apartment and was shocked. No doubt it had been renovated. Everything so luxurious, so beautiful. The hallway is finished with decorative plaster smothered in mirrors and various interior tidbits. "Mom, what's going on? Where did you get the money for such a renovation?" asked Vanessa in surprise. "None of your business. Get out of here," Maria shouted, peering through the narrow gap between the wall and the chain-locked door. "Where am I supposed to go?" "Where? You know I'm not home anymore." "Go back the way you came," the woman chattered. "That's it. Wait for the police." She screamed and slammed the door shut. She almost pinched her daughter's arm. What monster? Vanessa began to boil like the cauldron, when again there was the sound of the elevator opening and the district police officer appeared. "What is going on here?" The formidable man rubbed his stubble and chin. "Girl, leave the place. This is my house. I'm not going anywhere," Vanessa said firmly, crossing her arms over her chest. "I'm registered here." "That's right, but now we'll figure it all out." With those words, she disappeared through Maria's doors. As much as Vanessa wanted to, they wouldn't let her in. About 10 minutes passed. Vanessa was crouched on the stairs in expectation. Finally, the neighborhood agent came out of the apartment and headed toward her. Embarrassed, he ran his hand through Vanessa's sparse blonde hair. "I guess," he clarified. "Yes, let me go home." "I have nowhere to sleep tonight," Vanessa replied indignantly. "There's the thing." He cleared his throat and looked away, as if ashamed of what he was about to say. "Have you been discharged from this floor?" "I'm sorry, but by law you have no right to be here. You have to leave." To which Vanessa stretched indignantly. "But how? Is she my own mother, my own apartment?" "Yes, honestly I was surprised too, I admit it." She furrowed her brow. "I'm really sorry, but you better go." "But go where?" "I've got nowhere to go," Vanessa whispered, trying to shake off the coma that had crept up her throat. The policeman called the elevator. When he arrived, he waved them in, inviting the girl to follow him. "Come on, I'll help you." Vanessa made it through the night in the shelter. The kindly policeman could not leave the poor woman on the street so easily, and cordially offered her a place to stay in his house. He and his wife, like Vanessa, had 3 young children. When he brought the former bunny home, his wife gladly welcomed the stranger, fed her, and kindly provided her with something old but warm. And for such necessities, she provided the girl with a cot. The next morning, Vanessa took a shower, changed clothes, ate, and tidied herself up a bit. A new, even more difficult journey awaited her, although the policeman's wife had insisted that she stay with them as long as necessary. Vanessa did not want to abuse their hospitality. Warmly thanking her rescuers, she pulled herself together for the trip or left the apartment and walked to the bus stop. Once the first scare had passed, she realized that she could have rented a cheap hostel. He had money on his card, which he had earned in the colony, and he was grateful again for the kind policeman's delicate help. "I'll have to thank them later when I can." He thought about it and put it on his mental list of priorities. At last, the bus arrived. After paying her fare, Vanessa made her way to someone she hadn't seen in many long years. She was on her way to see her father when Vanessa stepped off the second-to-last bus. Large snowflakes immediately fell on her eyelashes. She looked around and whispered aloud. It had been many, many years since she had seen her own father, but she remembered exactly where he lived. "After her divorce, my mother managed to keep the apartment for herself, and my father had no choice but to move out of town. Her parents, now deceased, had a large and cozy country house. That, at least, was how Vanessa remembered it. As a child, she had loved to spend her vacations here. But after the death of the elders, the family completely abandoned the plot. But since Maria left her ex-husband homeless, the man had to move to live in the city. Or business, he looked and moved on the usual route. The way to this house he remembered by heart. He walked along the snow-covered path, from time to time, almost fell on the slippery turns, on the high snowdrifts. The frost bit into her cheeks, her hands were slowly beginning to fail her. But Vanessa had no intention of stopping, for her father was her last hope. She didn't know how he would react to her sudden appearance. She didn't know if her father would remember her. She didn't even know if he still lived here. And if he did, her thoughts immediately began to race through her mother's words, "He doesn't want you. He doesn't want to talk to you." But maybe she had already changed her mind. After all, Vanessa was no longer that little girl. She was an adult and independent. What if she had another family long ago? Or would she still find a place for her daughter who had problems with such contradictory thoughts? Vanessa was approaching the area she needed, and finally the roof of a familiar house came into view in the distance. A sea wind approached, conquered with renewed vigor. A real blizzard seemed to be approaching, or the faith of friends. Neck to neck stood in front of his father's property and scrutinized the shaft. The house seemed to look much better than she remembered, or wasn't sure, and she watched the fence, figuring out how to get in. Vanessa remembered the old village fences as low, rickety, barely holding a line. Now, however, in front of her was a tall, blank picket fence on brick pillars, and it was no longer easy to get into the parking lot. I was looking at the door. Yes, luckily he found the doorbell. Hesitantly, he pressed the button and backed up a couple of steps. He looked around again. Would it open? I wondered if Vanessa would remember me. Finally, I heard the crunch of snow under the feet of a man walking. It was clear that someone was approaching the door. Vanessa's heart froze and the door opened. A tall, stooped old man appeared through the door. His head was erect. Deep wrinkles under his eyes betrayed solid age, and he looked longingly at her father. He looked nothing like she remembered him. "Dad, it's me. Vanessa. Will you let me in?" The woman replied hopefully. She took a step forward, but she was too shy to approach her father. Her mother's last behavior had left a terrible mark on her. "Vanessa," she was surprised. "Daughter, is it really you?" "You recognized me, Dad." Vanessa smiled with tears in her eyes. "How could you not recognize your own son? Come in, sweetheart, how I've missed you." "Oliver." Vanessa's father held out his hand and gestured for her to enter, and Alia hesitantly stepped onto the property. She looked around. The path to the house was perfectly cleared by pure Russian apple trees. The white snow lay beautifully. She followed her father, entering the house, and her hands trembled slightly, nodding excitedly at what could be expected of him. After so many years, so many betrayals, or was it that she could no longer trust anyone? They entered the house, and the face immediately promised cozy, homey warmth from the open fireplace. The cozy living room was soothing, and Vanessa immediately wanted to collapse on the couch. Forgetting about everything in the world, she took off her snowshoes. Her father immediately provided her with soft, large, oversized slippers. He took off her jacket, grabbed her by the shoulders, and finally looked her over from head to toe. "Vanessa, my child, is it really you?" he asked again, and in the corners of his eyes froze tears of happiness. "I'm a daddy. You won't throw me out?" Vanessa asked uncertainly, shyly, averting her gaze. "What are you talking about?" He looked worriedly at his daughter. "How can you throw your daughter out? Come on, hurry up. Am I glad to see you? I confess I thought you had forgotten your father." With these words, Oliver dragged the girl with him. He sat her down at the big wooden table and began to run around the kitchen. He put the kettle on the gas stove, took several snacks out of the refrigerator. "I'm so glad to see you," he repeated over and over. "I never dreamed I could look at you just one more time." Vanessa sat on the kitchen couch, tucking in her father's frozen legs. She took the mug with something warm from his hands and couldn't start a conversation. "Dad, but you didn't want to see me," she said quietly, and there was a lump in his throat. "A lump? You've left us. What's the surprise?" A teaspoon slipped from his hand with a clink. "I did. What are you saying?" "What else am I supposed to say? Mom told me everything, how you left us, how you found another woman, how you never wanted to see me again, how you refused to pay alimony." She turned away from her father's surprised gaze. "I would never have come to you just like that. I have nowhere else to go." She sulked apologetically. "Vanessa, what nonsense are you talking?" He was really surprised by his daughter's words. "I asked for a divorce first, but I was divorcing your mother." "Honey, not you. And I didn't have any other woman at that time." He shrugged in bewilderment. "Every one of those days during all the long years we were separated, I thought about how my daughter was doing. Every day I kept trying to see her." He fell silent, biting his lip. "Your mother, she is a peculiar woman." You can't imagine how bitterly Vanessa replied. "Wait, I do not understand anything. Why did you get divorced?" "You see, at some point with Masha, with your mom, it became simply impossible to live. I remember one day I came home after work. You were just a child, and she started yelling at me, accusing me of cheating on her, although I never cheated on her. I swear. And then she said she didn't want to live with me anymore. That day I felt it in my bones. Something had happened, something had changed. From that day on, I was a different person, angry, cynical. She wasn't the same woman I married." "What are you talking about? What happened?" Or did she step forward with interest? It seemed to her that her mother had always been as she knew her. What did her father mean by that? She looked at him intently. You mean you never told him you didn't want to see me? Why didn't you pay alimony then? Did I? The man replied. His eyebrows seemed to run across his forehead in surprise. I always paid. I wrote you letters, gave you presents every holiday. Look at this. The last words reached Vanessa from the new opening between the kitchen and the bedroom. Dad ran into the back of the house, rattling boxes in the distance. Then he returned with an armful of papers. Look, Vanessa incredulously reached out to look at the papers. He really did pay, she observed in surprise. They were bank statements showing that Oliver had been transferring a decent amount of money into Maria's account each month. She took a quick glance at the statements, and then an old letter caught her eye. She recognized her mother's handwriting on those sheets. What was it about? Vanessa asked her father in a low voice. Without waiting for an answer, he began to read the letter. Her eyes widened in surprise. Her mother had written in it, among other swear words and angry accusations against her father. We don't need your credentials and letters. Vanessa said she didn't want to see you or hear from you ever again. She said she didn't want a cheating father. We laughed out loud reading your stupid writings. You never showed up in our lives again, and you made us sick just transferring money to support her. Goodbye. After reading these lines, she looked away from her father. What is this? Asked Vanessa. Did your mother write this to you? Yes. Oliver sank into the chair next to his daughter. I've been trying to get in touch with you for a long time. I could hardly believe that a bright girl like you could say such words, but your mother was adamant. She forbade me to talk to you, and the day I decided to wait for you after school, she found out about it and threw some bully she knew at me. They beat me up so badly that strangers called an ambulance. Thanks to them, I couldn't reach you, Vanessa. The only thing I could do was wait until you were old enough to make your own decisions. I had a big smile on my face, and now finally I have waited. But how have you lived all this time? You tell me. Wait, wait, wait. Or did you shake your head? I mean, all this time, Mom wouldn't let me see you and lied to me about child support. She lied to me about you not wanting to see me. And she lied to you about me not wanting to see you. But why would she do that? The girl asked in surprise. Your mother is lovely. She's changed a lot. I don't know what exactly has happened to her, but it's a fact. She's such a good person now that it's dangerous to confront her. I did my best and stepped aside. I'm sorry you had to go through all that time thinking that your own father abandoned you. I didn't mean for that to happen. Why are you so calm about all this? Vanessa was outraged. Aren't you the least bit surprised by this act? It's horrible. Where did he put the alimony money? We lived pretty poor after his divorce. Every time I asked him to buy me something when I was a kid, he would yell at me that my father didn't pay child support and there was no money. You realize I'd almost hated you, or did you jump out of your chair? Before, I wouldn't have been able to believe that your mother was really capable of something like that. But now, why don't you say something? She shouted at her father, unable to stand his calmness any longer. Your mother is like that. There's no controlling her. Forgive me again for everything. The father took his daughter's hands and looked her in the eyes. Have you grown so much? Tell me how your life has been going. Vanessa, helpless, leaned back in her chair. Oh, Daddy, I don't know where to begin. That night, Vanessa again told her father everything that had happened to her over the years. She told him about her childhood, how she had fallen in love with Andrew, and how mean he had been to cheat on her. She told him about Kelly, and Oliver was very surprised at her behavior because he remembered her as a child. Vanessa told him all about her incarceration in the women's colony, about life in prison, how she suddenly discovered she was pregnant, and how she barely survived. She gave birth to the triple Anya. Oliver listened to his daughter and could not believe all that such a young woman had to go through. She told how her mother supposedly didn't recognize her, how she had left the apartment. At the end of the story, it seemed that the father's already gray eyebrows had turned even paler. He said quietly, "My poor child. How sorry I am that I could not keep you safe." And she turned away from her father, hiding the tears. Wasn't it your fault? It was Andrew, her mother, and Kelly. They set me up. Oliver frowned. You met Andrew's mother on the bus. I thought, from what you told me, that he didn't want to hurt you. Yeah, well, he got out of it. If he hadn't, he wouldn't have testified against me. I'm pretty sure she was the anonymous witness. That's what the coroner told me. The identity of the witness is kept confidential in the interest of the investigation. Who else could have done it? I don't know, honey, but I think this woman can be trusted. Dad got up from the chair he'd been sitting in. Well, morning is morning. I'll get your room ready for you now. You go to bed. Tomorrow you and I will go get my granddaughters. They must not live in an orphanage as long as he lives, so the girls will be here with us. O looked at her father gratefully. Thank you, Dad. She stood up and followed her father up to the second floor. There Oliver prepared for Vanessa her old room, where she had slept as a child, and she fell asleep. As soon as her head touched the pillow, the night passed peacefully. Her last thought was, my God, I can't believe I'm going to pick up my daughters tomorrow. Vanessa stepped out of the car. The bright sunlight immediately hit her eyes and the frost got into her bones. She was back in the place where she had spent 2 whole years of her life, back at the front door of the women's colony. But now the reason for being here was much more cheerful and a faint smile. The frost seemed to freeze on her face. The impending encounter with the children could only lift her spirits. She passed through the security point, was issued the necessary pass, and at the entrance to the children's building was immediately greeted by the prison nanny, as all the bunnies who had children here jokingly called this kind woman. Vanessa opened her arms to give her a hug. You take care of the girls. You found a good place for them. Yes, Vanessa replied with pride in her voice. I reconciled with my father. He has his own big house, and we're going to live. It will be fine. I'll be able to raise my kids. That's great. Nanny nodded happily. What about the job? Or are you ashamed? Not yet, but I'll find one soon. I'll do what I can for the children. I'll do what I can. I understand. You're doing great. Good luck, child. And she was taken inside the walls of the orphanage. And there she finally saw her own children. The little ones were as happy to see their mom as their mom was happy to see them. She gathered up all the baby things that had been assigned to Vanessa at the prison, picked up the girls, and left there, hoping sincerely that it was for good. Oliver waited for them by the car, not hiding his impatience. My God, who do we have here? Look at the cuties. While he was getting to know his granddaughters, Vanessa looked at them with undisguised happiness. Now she had a family again. In this world, a father who gave them shelter and 3 daughters. What's your hurry, Mom? Asked a cheerful female voice from behind. Or did she turn sharply? Emily? Ella shouted, unable to believe her happiness. They let you out. But how? So sardonically, laughing, replied the parole officer friend, of course, how else my lawyer helped. And what secrets did you have for me? Vanessa said thoughtfully, already hugging her friend. Where are you going now? Emily winked cheerfully. Stay out of adult things. Honey, you'd better introduce me to your father. So they drove into town together. All the way they chatted and laughed, told each other the latest news, and the time on the road flew by. When Vanessa said goodbye, she left Emily her new address and made her promise to come visit her. Days passed and Vanessa began to feel a taste for life again. Together with her daughters, they finally moved in with their father and grandfather, and Oliver gave them the entire second floor. He also bought cribs for his granddaughters, the necessary clothes, and provided them with food and anything else they needed. Oliver had his own small grocery store in town. Therefore, the man had a lot of free time. He spent all his weekends and free time with his granddaughters. This freed his mother from some of the routine worries. Vanessa tried to recover little by little and start her life from scratch. She raised the children, took care of the household, and often helped her father in his business, filling in from time to time for the sales girls working at Oliver's. Life went on as usual, but memories of her prison job kept Vanessa busy. Apparently, she was the only one of the inmates who really enjoyed the monotonous job. So Vanessa had a new idea. She decided that she should train professionally and become a professional seamstress, maybe even a fashion designer. She already had experience, desire, and talent. Even those rough things that Vanessa sewed when she was still in the colony came out of her excellent quality the day she decided to turn her dream into reality. She signed up for an interview at the nearest sewing house. But here another cruel disappointment awaited the young woman because of her criminal record. She was not willing to accept even such an unskilled job, or she tried not to give up. But again and again she expected another refusal. No one wanted to get in touch with a former offender, and did not try by all means. She did not want to give up her favorite business half-heartedly. But unfortunately, all attempts were in vain. She never managed to find a job. One night, after receiving another rejection, the sad Vanessa returned home. "How are you?" asked the girl's father, distracted by playing with the girls. "Did you get caught?" "No," in a heartbeat, she replied, biting her lip, or herself ashamed that she had to serve time in prison, mostly for nothing. Bitter resentment pounced on her with renewed vigor. "No one will accept me. No one wants me," he shouted. "I don't judge them. I mean, really, who needs it? Honey, don't worry. If they don't take you in one place, they're sure to take you in another." The man got up and handed little Helen to his daughter. "It's not worth your while to cry. Daddy, I'm not going anywhere. Just accept it. Everyone thinks I'm a criminal. How much do I hate all this? It's not my fault. Of course it isn't. The important thing is that you know that. Don't worry about it. There's enough money for everyone." She has a big smile on her face. That's how she encourages her daughter. "And you didn't think you could work by yourself? I'll buy you a machine, fabric, thread, everything you need, and you can sew at home. And then we'll display the finished garments in my store." "Dad, you have a grocery store. And an industrial machine costs a lot of money. Forget it. I'll go wherever they take me," Vanessa replied with nostalgia in her voice. At the same time, the girls were placed at the feeding tables. "And?" Vanessa asked the man sincerely. "We are in the countryside, especially now that it's winter. Well, at least start with warm socks. And you know how to knit too. Let's see how the sales go." She had one lying around, so she rummaged in the nearest closet. "Oh, look. Why don't you at least try? There's no charge for asking. As they say, I don't know," Vanessa replied quietly. It was a dream come true for her to sell her own handmade and knitted items. "But to start now or embarrass me, Dad, you know, I'm offended by something else. I really didn't steal that pendant. Why doesn't anyone believe me?" "I believe you," Dad replied confidently and was quiet for a long while. Then he wrinkled his nose a little. He asked next, "Don't you want to tell Andres that he is going to have children?" Vanessa opened her eyes wide in surprise. "Andrew?" "No," the girl replied in a harsh tone. "He's not worthy of his own children." "Well, honey, he's their biological father. Maybe he should at least know." Do you think the girl's friends wouldn't want to keep in touch with their own father? Vanessa thought deeply. She immediately thought back to her childhood. The times when she missed her father, those days when she watched with envy as the other children at school and their parents were picked up. And her father, she thought then, had disowned her. The memories stung painfully. She definitely wouldn't want that for her daughters. Thinking, she replied, "I don't know, Dad. Maybe you're right." "Of course I'm right." "I'm sure you are," he replied. "For now, do what you want. But remember that sooner or later you will have to meet Andres. Tell him about the girls. Talk to him. Ask him why he did it." Vanessa and her father were already finishing feeding their daughters when the children, as well as Oliver, had already gone to bed or quietly went to the living room and sat down. In front of the fireplace, she began to knit her first woolen socks to sell. Sateva woke up in the early morning. Vanessa went out into the yard and stopped to look at the plot. The sun had just risen over the horizon and small snowflakes were falling. They seemed to hang motionless in the air. The surface of the brick house was covered with a light layer of snow, and the roads were again covered with a thick layer of snow. Warming up slightly, Vanessa set about clearing the path. Her father's back had been hurting lately, and he was no longer able to do such hard work. When she put the shovel away and looked around again, suddenly he realized that for the first time in his life, he actually lived in a village, a very normal little village with wild boars occasionally in the area. Many neighbors were raising cows or shoveling snow or lighting the fireplace. "I lived a most ordinary and simple life, but a very happy and fulfilled one. A warm feeling of gratitude pervaded his whole being. Who knows, had it not been for this incarceration in the colony, would he ever have enjoyed this lifestyle? She would have gone to her father. Disadvantaged by her birth mother, she would have given birth to 3 wonderful babies. I didn't know what to think. Vanessa was so used to hating everyone and everything that she had completely forgotten how important it was to realize the simple happiness that surrounded her. How important it is to appreciate simple, tasty food and clean water every day. To appreciate your family, to appreciate your freedom, after all. It turned out that even from her imprisonment, she was able to derive obvious benefits for herself. Interrupting her musings with a creak, the front door opened and a distressed Oliver Vanessa appeared in the doorway. He called out to his daughter, "What are you doing up so early today?" Ellie smiled broadly and went to answer his father's call. "I want to work more. Also a little today while the girls are asleep. By the way, has anyone bought me the socks and sweater of hope?" she asked and followed her father into the house. "Of course I did," the man replied proudly, putting his hand to his sore back. He made an inviting gesture and headed for the kitchen. A boiling kettle was already whistling. The first day your socks and sweater were sold out. The villagers were asking for more. I even promised a lady in the center of the district that you, Sasha, would make her a dress to order. Really? Wow. Or did you just gleefully splash your hands? If things keep going like this, I'm saving up for a good sewing machine. You'll definitely buy one. Honey, but you should know this. I can give you the money you need, and you can't. Vanessa rudely interrupted her father. I want to earn my own money, you know? Well, all right, all right. The father laughed heartily and placed a steaming cup of fragrant tea in front of his daughter. He squared his back and sat down opposite Vanessa, looking into her eyes. What have you decided about Andrew? Ely took a big sip and raised his eyebrows questioningly. What do you mean? What are you going to tell him about the kids? The father asked his question directly. She raised her eyes to the ceiling, dreamy. Lately, Vanessa hadn't realized how she felt about her ex-husband. During the long months she had spent in the colony, she had been so angry, so furious, that she often couldn't contain herself. But what about love? Even in prison, Vanessa clearly understood that behind the anger there were still warm feelings. Behind all that rage and hatred was a small, abandoned, hurt Vanessa. She probably never got to let go of her lover once and for all. After leaving the colony and after Vanessa saw Andrew's car in traffic, she ended up confusing her emotions. On the one hand, she hated him with all her soul because he had set her up, had tricked her on purpose to put her in jail. And on the other hand, it could not be said that Vanessa, being a reasonable person, still loved him. But sometimes she was visited by strange thoughts. What if he wasn't guilty of anything? It was difficult for the young mother to realize where he was hiding the truth. Did she still love her ex-husband, or did she hate him? Was he the one to blame for that setup, or was he himself a victim of circumstances? And that meeting with Betty. What did she mean when she said not to trust anyone? What was she doing in the reform school, as she used to do? There were far more questions than answers, or, come to think of it, answer to her father's perplexed and bewildered look. Yes, I'm willing to meet him. I want to find out who this anonymous witness was. I want to find out why I was treated that way, Vanessa said quietly. Old man, maybe you can find out why they did this to you. When are you going to visit him soon? Really, I want to visit someone else first, Vanessa said in a mysterious tone. Who else? Betty? I'll find out what she was doing in juvie and find out who the man was who set me up. Vanessa stared at the passing building. Holding tightly to the pores of the bus, she couldn't believe that soon she would be able to find out everything. Find out the reason for his imprisonment, find out his motives. She wasn't entirely sure she would meet Betty. She would make it. Her heart pounded in anticipation of the encounter. Thoughts swirled chaotically in her head. Her mind kept throwing out different scenarios. But Vanessa tried with all her might to keep herself under control. Finally, the doors opened and she got off at the stop she needed. She looked around. The neighborhood where her ex-husband had grown up and where Betty lived hadn't changed a bit. She took a deep breath and headed toward the house she was looking for. And with every step, her pulse quickened and her hands shook harder. What will I do if he's not home? She asked herself the same question. The day Vanessa and her mother-in-law had accidentally crossed paths on the bus. Betty got off at a completely different location. What if she no longer lived here? Vanessa walked up to the entrance from memory, dialed the intercom code. The door dropped and the girl climbed the stairs. Reaching the floor she wanted or wasn't sure, she pressed the buzzer. To her surprise, the door opened instantly and a haggard, tired woman appeared on the threshold. "Vanessa, what are you doing here, making no secret of your surprise?" She asked. "What have you come for?" "To find out the truth," announced Vanessa. "Why did you want my trial?" "What have I done to upset you so?" whispered Betty discontentedly. She took a quick glance up the stairwell. Then she grabbed Vanessa by the arm and pulled her back. She quickly closed the door to the apartment. "Quiet you. Why are you shouting all the way down the hall?" The woman was indignant. "Why? Are you afraid that someone will find out that you have set up your daughter-in-law? Explain immediately." The girl continued to insist. "Oh, Vanessa, don't you understand, Betty?" Frustrated, she shook her head. "Let's go to the kitchen." As the women walked to the back of the floor and sat down at the table, Andrew's mother took a long time to decide to start this conversation. She wrung her hands. The old woman's gaze kept wandering. She couldn't gather her strength and look her in the eye either. Finally, he exhaled deeply. She exhaled the first words out of Vanessa's mouth. "Believe me, it's not what it looks like. At first glance, it is much more complicated than that." The woman turned away guiltily, looking out the window with her wandering gaze. "I understand that you want to know why our family has treated you this way, but I won't be able to give you an answer. Not even with my eyes wide open. What does that mean?" A blue crown protruded from her forehead, indignant. "You realize what I've been through, don't you? I've been in jail for nothing, and it's hard for you to give me a reason. I thought you and I had always had a good relationship. Have you?" No, 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 no. Betty yelled at me. "I've always treated you well, and I'm treating you right now. There was no other way." "Oh my God." Vanessa jumped to her feet. "Stop talking in riddles. Why did you testify against me? Why did you set me up?" "Do I know what you mean?" the woman replied. "But I didn't give that testimony. It certainly wasn't me. Then who was it? Or did you approach your mother-in-law?" Her eyes flashed with anger. "Tell me, who is this anonymous witness?" "I can't tell you. I can't tell you." She turned away again, as if afraid to cross an enraged Vanessa and her gaze. "Just know that it wasn't me. I tried to help you, but circumstances got the better of me." "Then who was who? Andrew?" "It was him." "No, darling, of course it wasn't. I know you won't believe me, but Andrew never meant to hurt you. He always loved you." Vanessa laughed nervously. "Come on. When love goes to jail, you don't get custody. That's just the way it is. But believe me, Andrew had nothing to do with it either." At last, she looked Vanessa closely in the eye. "Remember what I told you. Think who you trust. That's all I can say." Elle closed her eyes, trying not to burst out screaming again. "All right, what were you doing at the women's colony? At least answer that." Betty thought long and hard before saying anything, tapping her fingers nervously on the table, frowning. "Okay, I'll answer," said the woman quietly. "I, like you, have been condemned. Only I, unlike you, have been allowed to stay at home under house arrest, but my movements are restricted. In addition, I have been assigned community service. There is a departmental factory not far from the colony. That is where I am forced to work. Fate has not only treated you badly, but also you. Why? Or did you just close your eyes in surprise? What have you done? That's just it. Honey, I'm not regretting anything. You and I got into a terrible mess. You got away with it. That's why I don't want to answer you. I don't want you to get involved in this again. In a situation like this, not knowing is the best thing to do. Yes, you had to spend time in prison, but now you're free. Forget about it all. Move on with your life." That's easy to say. Celia resented it. "My life is ruined. I can't get a job because of my criminal record. My mother kicked me out of the house, and my kids are kids." "What kids?" Betty asked in surprise. "And wait, Mom. Your mother kicked you out of the house? Where do you live?" Vanessa looked intently at her former mother-in-law and suddenly felt like getting even. She waved her hand. I'm not going to tell you anything. It's up to you. You haven't answered my questions, and I won't answer yours or Betty's. Wasn't it 6 months after you gave birth that you got out of prison? Did you give birth in prison? My God, did I become a grandmother? Betty's eyes lit up with happiness. Her lips stretched into a smile. Why didn't you say so from the beginning? I have a grandson or granddaughter, Betty. Granddaughter. I had triplets. Vanessa replied calmly. She was slightly embarrassed by her earlier behavior and went back to sitting at the kitchen table. Yes, my mother threw me out and kicked me out of the apartment. I reconciled with my father and now my daughters, and I live with him. Why were you surprised when I said Mom? Were you embarrassed? No, not at all. Forgetting that he cleared his granddaughter's throat means 3 times as much. How many things have you been through? When I can know them, when you can give me answers to my questions, Vanessa replied casually, rising from her seat. She left the apartment without waiting for her ex-mother-in-law's answer. She ran out of the house in a hurry. She didn't want to be there a second longer, nor did she know what to think. Once again, she had even more questions. What was Betty talking about? Why was she being judged? What was she hiding? Was Andrew really not to blame? Not wanting to think about what had happened anymore, Vanessa got on the bus and headed to the bus station to catch one to take her to her neighborhood. As it turned out, she was no closer to solving the mystery. But I don't know, Oliver said thoughtfully. I don't think she's lying. Then why isn't she telling the truth, Dad, if she has nothing to hide? Vanessa asked her father. That evening, when the girls were tucked up in their crib, Oliver and Vanessa sat together in the living room. In front of the fireplace, Vanessa was knitting a warm sweater for one of her daughters, while her father was arming himself with the right tools and fixing a broken clock. He replied to his daughter, Sometimes circumstances are stronger, don't I know that? What's going on out there? I don't understand. If Andrew's not to blame, is Kelly the one keeping everyone in fear? It's absurd. It's not absurd. Do you know how twisted people can be? Look at your mother. You'll say the same thing, or a grudging chuckle. What's she got to do with it? It's not like she's intimidated. Grandma, do you really think Betty's afraid of Kelly? Honey, I don't think anything. I'm just guessing. We'll never know. Yeah, I think you should listen to this woman. Payback never did anyone any good. Dad resented Vanessa. They ruined my whole life. How can I forget that and get on with my life? I want to find out who did this. All right. It's up to you, Oliver replied calmly and deflected the subject in another direction. So you went to see Andrew. He already knows he's a father. No, I didn't. And Betty turned away the spokes and cocked her head to one side. Talking to Betty, you made me go to his house too. Seeing the look of satisfaction on that bitch Alina's face, I didn't want that. And I think her mother will tell her herself. And if they're not in touch anymore, then what? No, you have to tell her. And Kelly is, well, what can you do? Don't worry about her for a second. She's not worth it. How come they don't communicate? Vanessa was shocked. She was so protective of him, so dismissive, screaming that it wasn't her fault he had a deadline. Do you think she would have defended him if they weren't in contact? I think they're doing well. You can't know for sure. You have to go and see for yourself. Talk to Andrew and let the situation go. That's what Vasilisa said. Live your life, Oliver urged his daughter. Vanessa wondered if it was Andrew who was keeping her mother in fear. Is that why she was talking about him like that? What if Andrew is the anonymous witness? It could be anything. Betty, go see him now and talk to him from the waist up. That said, Vanessa resumed her knitting. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. The family did not return to this conversation. With quiet, uncertain steps, spring was approaching, the snowdrifts were melting, leaving giant puddles, and all of nature was preparing to wake up. And Vanessa's work did not stop. In just a few months, she had built up a whole portfolio of customers. Orders poured into the craftswoman's hands like springtime streams. Life was improving little by little. Vanessa's daughters were growing up and making her and their grandfather happy. Oliver worked in his store. Vanessa herself was gradually recovering. She worked for her own pleasure and raised her daughters with passion. You could say that Vanessa's life was almost perfect if it weren't for one small detail. She could not forget what had happened to her. Literally every night Vanessa didn't sleep for a long time, all the while dribbling and thinking about how unfairly she had been treated. And who was to blame? It turned out that Vanessa couldn't take Betty Mikhailovna's advice, and once again decided to find out what was keeping her awake at night. She pulled herself together and left her children in the company of their loving grandfather. O returned to the city with the purpose of seeing Andrew. She drove to the house where she had lived for those years. As soon as Andrew turned 18, his parents bought him a separate apartment, and he, of course, immediately invited his girlfriend to live with him. The young people lived together, and if someone had told them, then how would be their future life? To remember the past, to believe in all the recent events was unbearably difficult, even impossible. Approaching the house, Vanessa raised her head, squinting against the bright sun. She quickly found the balcony of Andrew's apartment, and nostalgia returned to her with renewed vigor. She remembered how, when she had moved in with her fiancé, she had started a greenhouse on her balcony, how she had gone across town to buy another flower. Now the balcony was empty, and now she lived there with annoyance, Vanessa observed to herself. She couldn't get it through her head. Why had Andrew abandoned her so easily? How could he have left the one he had once loved more than life? Why had he changed her for another in an instant? Vanessa made her way to the entrance and, without thinking, rang the doorbell. After her conversation with Betty, she didn't know what to expect. Andrew opened the door. "Hello," stunned, she looked at Vanessa. She said hello. Finally seeing Andrew after a long pause, Vanessa immediately realized something was wrong with him. Panic in her eyes. It looked like he was the one being held prisoner and not Vanessa. She lifted her chin proudly. "Why?" he asked instead of waving. "If you fell out of love with me, why didn't you leave me? Why did you have to ruin my whole life like that?" Andrew lowered his eyes. "Vanessa, you shouldn't have come here." "Why should I?" The girl was outraged. "What secrets do you and your mother have? How many times? At least explain everything. Have a conscience, after all." Andrew raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Have you seen your mother? How is she? What's wrong with her now?" He turned around, peering down at the floor, and took a step forward, stepping out into the hallway. "What has she told you?" he asked, lowering his voice. "No answers first. Or did she point the finger at her ex-husband? I'm sick of all this. I just want to know why I've been treated like this." "Andrew," he scratched his ear uncertainly, "you'll find out, I promise. Just give me some time." "Time for what? What do you need time for? What's going on here?" Vanessa almost shouted, "Why did you testify against me?" "I didn't," Andrew shouted, and immediately embarrassed by his own emotionality. "And believe me, your incarceration was the only way out for us. Do you even know what you're talking about? Have you ever been to juvie? Do you think it's paradise? No, I haven't. I was faced with such a choice that your incarceration was the lesser of evils." "Those people." "What people?" Vanessa interrupted. "Who are you talking about? Those people could have done much worse things to you. I still don't know who sent them. But it's very dangerous to mess with them." Andrew, like a frightened child, turned at every noise. His voice was calm. It was evident that he was very frightened. He lowered his voice. "You shouldn't be here. Go away, please go away, I'll get back to you later." When the sharp sound of the door opening prevented the man from finishing that sentence, Kelly appeared in the doorway. "What people?" she said in an unpleasant voice. "What are you doing here?" Vanessa took a menacing step forward, looking sternly into her former friend's eyes. Vanessa was no longer the shy girl who had cursed at every loud word a couple of years ago. Prison had taught Vanessa. Life had taught her not to be afraid to look her enemies straight in the eye. Seeing her former friend's confident gaze, Kelly visibly stiffened, but tried not to show it. She rephrased her question, "Why did you come here?" "To look you in the eye," Vanessa said plainly. "Why did you do this to me?" "That you were afraid Andrew wouldn't last long." "If I'm still free," Kelly seethed, losing her self-control. "How dare you?" she screamed. "Andrew was never yours." The ex-husband, who had been standing beside her the whole time, shot a meaningful glance at Vanessa, and turned to Kelly. "Don't be nervous. Shall we go inside?" "No," snapped an already enraged Kelly and hurled, "Vanessa, you're a dirty thief. You got what you deserve. Thieves should be in jail. It's not your pendant, it's Andrew's family pendant. You had nothing to do with it, you just slandered me. And you were my best friend. Do you know how they treat people like you in juvie? Or did you just squint? Is Kelly getting nervous? I don't know and I don't want to know. That's the kind of knowledge I'll never need." "We'll see about that," Vanessa replied firmly and turned and walked away. On the way home, Vanessa couldn't stop thinking about Andrew's words. What kind of people he was talking about and why he had stopped communicating with her mother. And about Alina's strange behavior. All nervous and jittery. What could be going on, the girl thought. Andrew said that jail was the lesser of evils. What could be worse than jail? She thought deeply about that question. By the time she was walking home, the hair on the back of her head seemed to stand on end. His blood froze in his veins and his heart skipped a beat. He seemed to realize what Andrew meant. What could be worse than prison? Death. The girl walked the rest of the way, glancing nervously around. Betty was right. She shouldn't have gone in there. A cold, clammy sweat ran down her back with her eyes closed in fear. He had never told her about the children, had he? Vanessa was completely confused by all the recent events. She burst into the house like she was being chased by dogs, bolted the gate, and ran into the foyer, ripping off her shoes and jacket. Dad called Oliver and hurried into the living room and then into the kitchen. Vanessa froze in surprise. Her father, smiling cordially, was sitting in the company of a portly, red-haired woman. Emily shouted to Vanessa and was instantly in her friend's arms. "Good to see you. I've been waiting for you. Hi." It was obvious that Emily was glad to see you too. "How was your trip?" Vanessa sighed nervously. "Dad told you everything." "Yes, you don't have to tell me the latest news." Emily smiled softly. "Yes, I'm already in the loop, not Tommy. What did Andrew say?" Vanessa sank back. The look Dad actually gave didn't say anything. She briefly recounted today's events to Emily and Dad. And they both collapsed into the arms of the old couch. As always, more questions arose. Who were these dangerous people? Why was jail the lesser of evils? I don't understand anything at all. Who was the anonymous witness? The moment Vanessa mentioned the mystery witness, Emily and her father's faces visibly changed. Emily and her father's faces visibly changed, or asked in surprise, "What's wrong? What's wrong with you?" She looked worriedly from her father to her friend Vanessa. Emily got up from the table and approached the girl, taking her hand. "I came to see you for a reason. I learned something, that or looked interested." "What are you talking about?" "Remember when we were in juvie and I promised to help you with your case?" Emily asked. "Of course I remember. Tell me what you found out. Isn't it intriguing?" "Don't ask me how, but I was able to get into the files and found out who that anonymous witness was. I know who gave that testimony that got you thrown in jail." Emily exhaled heavily, not breaking eye contact with her friend, or burning with curiosity. Who is he? Who? Talking. And already she gripped the woman's arm tightly. Or was it her mother? How? Or was her whole life flashing before her eyes? He knew his mother was far from being a gift, and what his father had told him didn't fit the image of the perfect mother. But to send her own son to prison knowing it wasn't her fault. Vanessa couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Are you sure?" she asked quietly. Maria was the witness. It was she who told in color how she saw you hide and steal the toilet, the pendant. "I'm sorry, I really don't know how to support you." Emily went down to the palace, holding her hands tightly. "I can't imagine how anyone could do that to their own daughter." "I can't either." Vanessa spoke softly. She looked at Oliver. "Dad, did you know?" "I just found out now from Emily," the man replied. "I'm shocked too. I knew Maria would frame anyone but you. I don't know what to think. Why would he do that?" Thoughtfully, as if to himself, asked the older man. "I don't know," Vanessa replied quietly. "But I will find out. This cannot go unpunished. He must answer for it." With these words, Vanessa got up and ran out of the kitchen. She went upstairs to her daughter's room. How can this be? thought Vanessa, and immediately analyzed the situation with herself. Could she have incriminated her daughter? Never and never in her life. Whether after the father's story or definitely changed her opinion about her mother. But still she tried to understand her. But now Vanessa realized that she now refused to relate to her. She had finally figured out who was involved in the setup. She had figured it out and was ready to get revenge. The next day, Vanessa traveled to the city. She was overcome with anger, for the pain of her own mother's betrayal was unrelenting. Once again, she went to confront the relationship. True, she now had some information at her disposal. After reflecting on previous dialogues, Vanessa decided to prepare herself thoroughly. After consulting with her father and Emily, who was staying with them for a few days, Vanessa went to her mother's house for a reason. This time she had an ace up her sleeve. Once all the equipment was checked and a couple of important calls were made, Vanessa entered the house with a confident stride. She went upstairs and immediately drummed on the front door. "Open up," she shouted, sure that her mother was already home. "I know you're here." Oh, spared no effort. She knocked as if her life depended on the force of those knocks. Until a few hours ago, thanks to Emily's programmer, the women had managed to find out that Maria had returned to the apartment in the early hours of the morning. She had not left the house again, so there was no doubt. The traitor. I heard a knock at the door. After a few long minutes, the door opened ajar and Maria peeked through the crack, her face covered in sweat. "Why are you sad?" He poked me. "Stop embarrassing me in front of the neighbors." Or he did. Now was not the time to be ceremonious. When the door opened, he quickly stuck his foot in. Her huge, sturdy shoes prevented her mother from slamming the door shut, and Vanessa was able to force her way in. The frightened mother backed up a couple of steps. "Is this how prison changes people? You go crazy. You throw yourself at your own mother." "Now you remember me?" "Yes," Vanessa asked with a smirk. She had taken a quick look around. The apartment had been beautifully renovated. Marble paneling, luxurious period furniture had just broken her eyes. Oh, asked where the money had come from. "Mom, did you really get such a bargain for framing your own daughter?" Maria was stunned. "How do you talk to your mother?" She shouted. "Get out of here or I'll call the police again." Oh stepped forward. "Are you my mother?" In a low, threatening voice, she said. "It's not you, and I reject you. I know everything. Just tell me why you wanted to do this. And what do you know?" Maria snorted. There was no trace of the recent fear left. "Well, I didn't expect you to guess, did I? I've always had you. Answer me, why? Why did you do it? Or did you take it a step further with your mother? Why? Why? Why?" I repeated after my daughter. "Because you were of no use to her." Her eyes flashed with madness. "Who did you marry?" "Your father, I suppose." "You wouldn't have agreed to steal that pendant, would you?" "Neither would I. So I had to get rid of you, I'm sorry. So you admit you set me up." "I admit to perjury," Vanessa asked, raising her voice. "Oh, this is a dead end." The woman laughed. "Of course it is. You're nothing but trouble. That's Kelly. I wish she was my daughter. I saw potential in her when she was a kid. She'd do anything to get what she wanted. It's not like you're a wimp. Did you put me in jail for some dangling and put Kelly up to it? Or did you wonder again, even though you vowed not to wonder about anything anymore? What kind of people put you up to it? Was it Andrew's mother? It was you. Who else?" "Of course it was me," I laughed with renewed vigor. "When you and Kelly were very young, thanks to Kelly herself, I made a useful friendship. Her uncle was out of jail at the time. He was very famous in the world of thieves. He had his eye on me right away and introduced me to his rooftops. I always knew the good life wasn't for me, and your boring father was always boring. Then I heard about the pendant, which was legendary among thieves. We knew it belonged to some family in our village, but we didn't know to whom. I divorced your father, and I started dating my Zach." The woman smiled almost sweetly. "He is an incredibly interesting man. He has such a dangerous and interesting life with all of them." Maria told it all with undisguised pride. Vanessa felt chills. She couldn't believe that this strange foreign woman was her own mother. Vanessa asked softly, "So you contacted the criminals and instigated them to steal the pendant?" But why didn't you get rid of me before you let me live with my father? What a fool you are, she shook her head. Your father paid good alimony. With that money, I helped my man Zach get back on his feet when he needed it. And then you managed to do some good yourself. Don't look so surprised. You grew up and fell in love with that Andrew Tonto of yours. I still remember you dreaming about a mysterious pendant you passed around. What was my surprise when I realized it was that very jewel? Since you were 16, we have been preparing for this case. Stealing her would have been a real mistake. It was too notorious, so we had to play it safe. How? Did you get Kelly to seduce Andrew? Did Vanessa feel like she was going to puke with disgust? No, Kelly was up to her neck without my help. The crazy lady let out a disgusted giggle. Because of her coming of age, I made a deal with her. I help her get rid of you, and she seduces Andrew and keeps the pendant. We split the money, and it's all about the money. How is that possible? Vanessa said quietly. Of course it is. Do you have any idea how much this thing is worth? Zach's goons intimidated Betty and Andrew. She fought back hard enough to defend you in court, but Andrew had to be shut down too. He was given a choice between you going to jail or having a terrible car accident. Of course, he agreed to stay out of it to keep you alive. That idiot loves you. I don't know why, really. Andrew cheated on me at my wedding. He kissed Kelly. What kind of love is that? Bitter. Vanessa smiled. I don't think you can fake that. Maria laughed wickedly. One can know all the right methods. They must have slipped something into him. That's why the guy lost his mind. And forcing him to marry the line wasn't hard. The threat of death of loved ones can accomplish a lot. Maria said mockingly, and immediately threw her daughter a suspicious look. Whom will you be paroled? So soon, Ub. You were always a guy. You got 6 years. That should have been enough time for us to finish all our old business here and go overseas. And here you are, hello, surprise. Why can't you stay in one place? What are you doing? Where don't you belong? You said Andrew threatened to kill me, said Vanessa in a low, changed voice. If I had refused your terms anyway, would you really have killed me? Maria smiled predatorily and looked at her daughter with completely crazed, glassy eyes. Why did he hesitate? He took a quick step into the kitchen and returned holding a large kitchen knife. I told you to stay out of it. I didn't pretend not to remember you. Why did you choose your own destiny? With those words, the woman began to slowly move forward, glowering predatorily and with knife at the ready. It was all happening like a nightmare. Vanessa felt that a little more and she would simply faint from terror, but still she gathered her strength and screamed at the top of her lungs. Now she had the knife. That Mary jumped to her feet, looking around. At the same instant, the door to the apartment opened and Owen agents rushed in. They placed the witch with the knife face down on the marble floor so that she would not move. Are you under arrest? Shouted one of the agents. Finally, we have a lead on this OCG. Shortly after, the police officers Vanessa already knew entered the room. One of them was the cop who didn't leave the poor girl in trouble. And with him, Police Captain Benjamin. In person. Or did she smile gratefully at the men? Thank you for believing me, she said. Thank you, the captain replied. You've helped us find dangerous criminals we haven't been able to catch for years. You deserve all the respect you can get. And about the wrongful conviction, we will provide you with a lawyer, the case will be reconsidered, the conviction will be dismissed, and the state will compensate you for moral damages. An officer from the police station interrupted the conversation. When I came here for a call, I immediately realized that something was wrong. It's good that you called me Vanessa. People like her should be behind bars. That's for sure, Vanessa summed up. Before going to her mother's house, she had a long consultation with Emily. She had suggested the excellent option of contacting a policeman she knew. Either that or exchange phone numbers with him and offer him a deal. Vanessa arrived at the police station and in her concealed clothing, a listening device. She deliberately turned to her mother with the intention of getting as much information out of her as possible. And it was no coincidence that he asked Maria so many questions. At that point, the police department listened to the entire conversation and recorded it for evidence in court. Thus, Maria was looking at a very good conviction, framing not only herself, but also Kelly and her criminal uncle. Betty finally discovered the truth. "I hope we can get to the rest of the OCG," Vanessa said. "The mobsters should be in jail." "We'll do what we can," Captain Benjamin told her. "Don't worry." Maria's case turned out to be so high profile that it was the talk of the town for several more months. The police had managed to track down the entire criminal gang he was talking about, and each of its members got what they deserved. Maria herself, as well as Kelly and her uncle Zach, received solid sentences. It turned out that on their account, not only this crime, but something worse. The court passed sentence. Vanessa acknowledged her mistake and was paid a large sum for moral damages. With the money received, she was able to fulfill his dream, took out a loan, bought a plot of land on the outskirts of the city, built on it a building, and opened her sewing house. In a few years, her business grew with branches, and she became a famous fashion designer. Now the whole city wore Vanessa's clothes. That's how she named her salon. This whole story taught Vanessa not to judge a person by their past. After all, as practice shows, an ex-convict can be much more human than a good housewife. Vanessa herself was always happy to employ women who had left the colony. She paid no attention to their past, but gave them all a new chance to find themselves in this life. A few months after her mother's arrest, Vanessa reconciled with Andrew. It turned out that her intuition did not fail her, and the ex-husband turned out to be completely blameless. When Andrew found out about his daughters, he was happier than ever. Our dreams had come true. She screamed with joy, throwing up one after another, the little ones emitting with delight. Vanessa and the children moved into Andrew's apartment. There he took up his old hobby again on the spacious balcony and set up a real greenhouse. Oliver's life didn't stop either. He was so attracted to the kind, intelligent, and decent Emily that he began to court her. After a few months, the woman surrendered to the mercy of the victor. Thus a new happy couple was formed. Having got rid of Maria, the whole family breathed a sigh of relief, and Betty could once again have a child and a normal life. After all, both Maria and Betty had been charged as accomplices in the robbery. And Vanessa no longer held a grudge against anyone. She became more understanding and tolerant. No matter how unfair her life had been at first, but in the end, she put everything and everyone in their rightful place.
Subscribe and click the bell.
Adriana Smith was one of those girls who in Soviet times would have been described as a Komsomol girl, a student, an athlete, and simply beautiful. But since Adriana was born a year after the collapse of the Soviet Union, any Komsomol was out of the question. Everything else was pure truth. The girl studied at the psychological faculty of the university, respected sports, and not just respected, and in her free time went to the gym and conquered guys with her gorgeous figure and exquisite beauty. Her green, slightly slanted eyes put on associations with the witches Rusalka and Undina, and her waist-length golden brown hair completed the impression. There was no shortage of admirers, but the heart of the young beauty was taken in the first year of university. Its happy owner was James, a law student. The guy was a year older. "Bah, excuse me. Can you tell me where the third bakery is?" He heard the melodious voice of a beautiful freshman one day and realized he was lost. "Come on, I'll show you," James offered with a smile, and the girl nodded gratefully. On the way to the bakery, young people met and the same day realized that they were made for each other. After receiving his diploma, James got a job at the tax office. The salary was impressive, and the young specialist thought about making Adriana an offer. And why not? After all, after a year, James was already on his feet and therefore could provide for his family. "I will propose when James gets his diploma." He shared his plans with his parents, and they quite approved of his son's decision. They were fine with Adriana. "She's not a bride. She's a miracle," said Betty, James's mother. "She's a clever girl and a beauty, and a good housekeeper. Don't you dare miss her." "I'm not going to," replied the son with a smile. It was done. Adriana received her diploma, and James made the girl an offer, which she gladly accepted. The young employee of the tax service decided not to save money on the wedding. The celebration was fun, crowded, and very beautiful. It seemed that there would be a lot of happiness ahead, but life often presents surprises, which, unfortunately, are not always pleasant. No matter how many spouses tried to conceive a child, they did not succeed. James and Adriana bypassed a lot of doctors, but all to no avail. The young woman became depressed. "Don't worry, kitten," James said. "I love you. And that's the most important thing. The rest will come." But then a lot of women have changed when they've lost all sense of Christina. So as long as we're alive, not all is lost. "Yes," Adriana smiled weakly. "You're probably right." She tried not to despair, but apparently she wasn't trying hard enough. One day, after another failed attempt to get pregnant, she'd snapped at James for the first time, even though she couldn't blame him. That night her husband didn't come home for the first time, and then things escalated. Adriana had no time to look back, and the spouses' sleepovers outside the house became a regular occurrence. In 3 months, Adriana came home and found in the marital bed a pretty blonde girl. It was a girl, because the latter is unlikely to have marked the age of majority too young. About such usually say young as early. Once Adriana sincerely thought that such situations are possible only in bad anecdotes, but not in life. Turns out she was wrong. No, she didn't make a jealous scene. Why humiliate herself? Oh no, that's not Adriana Smith. She just turned around and went back to her parents' house. A week later, James stood on her parents' doorstep. "I'm sorry," he said, handing Adriana a bouquet of tulips. "I don't know if I can," she replied, looking thoughtfully at her husband. "You try." Barely audible, James said. God knows she tried to appear calm, but she couldn't hold back the tears. Her husband held Adriana close to him and stroked her hair. Sha, it's okay." That same day, Adriana returned to James. The family idyll lasted exactly a month. That is, until Adriana, returning from work, accidentally saw her husband with her good acquaintance. James and Christina were sitting in a cafe holding hands. Adriana was tempted to run to the cafe. Yeah, and pulling Christina's hair. Yeah, and just as long as it didn't hurt. But after a minute, Adriana thought, no, we'll go another way. That evening, when they were both home, she said without offense that she'd seen the whole thing. Adriana had subconsciously hoped that James would say that it had been a chance encounter and purely friendly. But nothing of the sort had happened. "Yes," her husband replied with a sigh. "I should have told you about it earlier. Christina and I love each other." "How long have you had this?" asked the young woman, Drogba in your voice. "Not long," shrugged James. "What difference does it make? Really no sobbing. And I don't remember myself running out into the street." And then there was a divorce with all the ensuing consequences in the form of the division of the apartment, the division of property, and the news of Christina's pregnancy. That was a low blow. "Calm down. You're gonna be fine." Adriana's friend Kathy tried to talk some sense into Adriana. "With such a beauty, you will not be alone for long." But Adriana just shook her head. She didn't believe anyone else. And in the back of her mind, somewhere in the very bottom of her mind, Christina glimmered that James would come back. But he'd forgotten all about Adriana. Her classmate Clara, who was not particularly tactful, said that James and Christina are happy, walking through the park, holding hands. And your ex was like a faithful dog, pouring it all over her face. Holding hands, she thought. Just like that time in the cafe. And out loud she said, "Slaga, I'm sorry, but I'm not interested." Adriana worked as a school psychologist, but now she felt like a cobbler without boots. She herself needed the help of a specialist. So the principal suggested that Adriana take a week off. The young woman gladly accepted the offer. She went to the base where she walked a lot and read books. Of course, men tried to court her, but Adriana only guffawed. What's in store for the prince? The week flew by like a day. On the way back to the city, Adriana feared she'd be depressed again, but she didn't. She went back to work. Life went on as usual, and it seemed like an early start to life. But one day Adriana was walking down the street and saw Christina with a stroller. The young woman became hysterical. She sat down on a bench and began to scream. "Are you sick?" A man asked her sympathetically. "About 25 years old." "I think so," nodded Adriana. "Only you don't have to worry about that." But why didn't the young man agree, handing her a small bottle of mineral water? We're all human. Sometimes it's good to talk it out. And a stranger would be better for that purpose than a best friend. Adriana remembered how Clara had poured salt on her wound. That was when she realized that the young man's words had some merit. Adriana also realized that she really needed to talk. After all, her friends didn't really care about her problems. But then, why should a strange man care about them? Well, he offered himself as a shoulder to cry on. "By the way, my name is William." The man introduced himself with a smile. Adriana trustingly, she smiled back. "So what is your problem, Adriana?" William asked softly. It's just hard to imagine that such a beautiful girl could have serious problems. She sighed and told her sad story. "What can I say?" The young man waved his hands. "We all walk under God, and no one knows what will happen tomorrow, the day after tomorrow in a week. There is no need to despair. And your husband? Well then, that's not the man you were going to get along with." "Maybe," Adriana nodded. "But to be honest, it doesn't make me feel any better." "Time heals," William shrugged and winked. "You know what you need right now. And what's to get drunk?" "I'm sorry, get drunk what?" repeated the new acquaintance. "Actually, I don't drink." So I laughed too, he laughed. "But there's a first time for everything, isn't there? So let's go to the bar. A toast to getting to know each other. Let's go." She made up her mind. That day, Adriana drank herself into oblivion for the first time. And the next morning, she woke up in her own apartment, realizing that someone was lying next to her. The young woman cried out. It was William. "What are we doing up?" "Fun," he asked, opening his eyes. "I'm that. And you and I are what?" William gave a funny shout, and a second later, Adriana laughed infectiously. "But actually, last night at the bar, we got into a you versus me thing." "Yeah, not really," she mumbled embarrassedly. "But we did." The young woman was silent, and William said seriously, "Adriana, we are adults. What happened is what happened. But if you're so uncomfortable, I can leave, and you'll never see me again." Adriana was silent. She suddenly realized that I didn't want to. I must admit that William turned out to be an attentive and interesting conversationalist. And most importantly, it was much easier in his company. According to William, he was a freelancer, but when asked what he does, William answered a little bit of everything. "Sometimes I work with advertising agencies, repair cars, phones, and stuff like that." "I see," nodded Adriana. A few months later, William proposed to Adriana. They signed without witnesses and other wedding tinsel. And then they moved on to married life. This time, the absence of children did not bother Adriana too much. Either she had gotten over her desire to be a mother, or she had the impression that William did not pay any attention to it. But the fact remained. Sometimes Adriana wondered how much William would be enough. She waited for her husband to talk about children, but it never happened. What happened was much worse. One day, Adriana came home from work and found the young woman in her kitchen. "And you pardon me?" Who was taken aback, Adriana? And I smiled. "Stranger. Camille. I mean, it's a pleasure. My name is Adriana. You must be related to William." "Yeah, I guess I am." Camille nodded. "I didn't see you at the wedding." Adriana said, "I wasn't there, but I'm going to live here now." "Didn't William say he was planning to file for divorce?" "Are you kidding?" Adriana exclaimed. Camille shrugged her shoulders. "You get a divorce, and I'll live here with William." "What do you mean here?" "This is my apartment, but my Lachka was yours and now she's ours. grinned the intruders. "Do you want to see the papers?" Adriana already sensed something wrong, but she said please. And when Adriana saw the document, according to which the apartment now belongs to William, her eyes went black. It was nothing more than a deed of gift. Based on its contents, it appeared that Adriana had given her apartment as a gift. "You see," Camille said triumphantly, "William's apartment, and you have almost no rights to it. I say almost, because it's a matter of time." "Are you all lying?" shouted Adriana. "This document is a fake. I'm going to call Yura now." "Yes, please," sniggered the rival. And hearing the rattle of the key in the keyhole, added, "And here, by the way, he is, so no need to call anyone. But I see you've already met him," said William with a wicked smile. And Adriana realized with horror that everything this Camille had said was true. "William, what does that mean?" She demanded an explanation. "It means, my dear, that you are nobody in this apartment, and your name is nothing. I'm filing for divorce, and Camille will live here now." "Well, I think she's already filled you in on that." "But for what?" Adriana whispered. Tears welled up in her eyes. "Why not?" William shrugged. "You want to live. You've got to get your head around it. And if you don't want to be evicted from here with the police, you'd better pack your things and vacate the premises. And I'm still your wife." "Squeezing it out like that," nodded the husband. "But it's a matter of 1 month. Will it make any difference?" "I guess not. This is my woman, and you're not here." And smirked added, "Or do you want to be the third? I didn't know you were such a drag. What kind of scumbag are you?" Adriana shook her head. "But that's just the way it is." The young woman realized she had nothing more to do here. She went to pack her things, but then William remarked approvingly, "I always knew you were a smart girl." Adriana packed her suitcase and left the apartment. But where to go? Her parents were so happy that after the divorce, which had not been easy for their daughter, she had managed to organize her personal life and finally become a victim of a con artist. And where to go? Adriana thought feverishly. The young woman sat on a bench and caught the pitying glances of people passing by. She looked very unhappy indeed. The young woman wanted to forget from her longing. Adriana went to Kathy, who lived nearby. "Did you go to the police?" asked her friend. "No," she shook her head. "I hadn't thought about it." "And you should have. The document seems to be authentic." Adriana said in despair. "That's not a fact. In any case, it should be checked. Here's the thing. You, of course, cried, but go to the police tomorrow morning." "I'll do that." A visit to the police turned up nothing. What can I say? The officer, whose name was Noah. "You've just been scammed out of your apartment. I figured that out without you," Adriana said sadly. "But what to do? The document can be checked for authenticity." "Of course it's important," said the policeman. "But for that, we need a warrant. What's the problem?" The young woman started to get agitated. "And you do not yell at me, or you get involved with the wrong people. And then you tell us how to do our jobs." "I'm sorry." Adriana decided it was better not to make the policeman angry, or God forbid, he'd refuse to take the case. "What's the big deal?" He waved his hand. "So that's that. Now I'll give you some pictures of marriage and apartment swindlers. What if your husband is among them?" The policeman laid out some photos in front of the young woman. "Is that him?" Adriana exclaimed. "That's William." "Are you sure?" "Well, you know, I lived with this man for a year. The thing is, this man is known to us," as Charles told the policeman. "You're not the first person he's dumped on an apartment, are you?" "And what's with the dropped voice?" asked Adriana. "What are my chances of getting my apartment back?" "We'll try to do our best," Noah replied evasively. She just sighed. It sounded, to put it bluntly, not very encouraging. But there was nothing to do. "Come up tomorrow at 10:00, and we hope for an apartment," added Vason. "Well," nodded Adriana, and walked out of the office. She was scared to even think that she could be left on the street. Adriana's parents were living in one. She didn't want to embarrass them or even upset them. So what did the police tell you? Kathy asked when Adriana got back. Nothing concrete yet. She sighed and told them about the visit. Yes, friend. I don't envy you, Kathy said sympathetically. But let's hope for the best. Let's hope for the best. But the hopes for the future were not realized. The document turned out to be the most authentic, and the policemen could only throw up their hands. But is there nothing that can be done? Adriana asked. Is there no way to prove that I lived here? After all, this apartment was given to me as a result of the exchange after the divorce. An exchange. Divorce. Grinned Vason. Not a boring life, citizen. And for the future, I recommend to be more careful in choosing a life partner. And do not get involved with anyone. Everything will be like people. Adriana realized that the police just don't want to spoil the statistics with another case. But maybe there were other ways to get the apartment back. Kathy pondered. There must be evidence that you and your ex-spouse are exchanging the apartment. Would you just give up? Who told you that? But it didn't turn out to be that simple. Apparently, William Charles was a master con artist. There's a reason this Vason guy said Adriana wasn't his first victim. There was no record of the apartment being exchanged. The deed of gift in William's name was authentic. What was there to do? Only go to her parents and tell them everything. After all, Kathy had a boyfriend, Benjamin, who was looking at the beautiful young lodger with marked interest. Adriana, I understand and sympathize with you, but you have to understand, Kathy said. Yes, I understand, Adriana replied and went to pack her things. But trouble does not come alone. A few days after the young woman moved in with her parents at Sebastian's, her father began severe heart pain, a massive heart attack. The doctor said he could not be saved. And after 40, Sebastian's mom Cindy quietly passed away in her sleep. It's my fault, Adriana lamented. It was because of my problems that Daddy and Mommy were gone. And again, the apartment issue. The one-room apartment where Adriana's parents lived had turned out to be disputed, and she had been asked to leave it. But how come? She asked an employee of the city administration. You see, I have nowhere else to go, and you think it's my problem, arrogantly said a burly middle-aged woman. Then Adriana realized it was a dead end. It couldn't get any worse. The young woman left the apartment and went wherever she was looking. And they were looking nowhere. Adriana had some money left, enough to rent a small house in the private sector, but she decided not to spend it. So the young woman moved into a social hotel for people in difficult life situations. But however she got there, she became a real homeless person. No residence registration, no place of her own. On top of that, Adriana was fired from school. Nothing personal, the principal said. But I don't want any problem employees. Nice one. The psychologist lives in a social hotel. David, but I need something to live on. The girl said in despair, I'll find something. Fine, he nodded. When you think of something, then come back. I'm sure you won't have any trouble getting a job. Adriana, I'll be perfectly frank. Personally, I like you very much. But there's such a thing as the image of an institution. It's gotten to the point where students are whispering about you. So I'm sure the hotel will take good care of you. You won't starve to death. I heard you, Adriana replied. I won't spoil the image of the school. Have a good day. Having said that, the young woman left. And when she left the principal's office, she really felt the mocking looks of her colleagues and students. God, until when will fate test my strength? Adriana thought sadly. She went back to the hotel and sat down on the flimsy sofa, covering her face with her hands. Adriana thought back to everything. The former husband of the con man William Charles, the check-in at the social hotel, and finally the dismissal. Did something happen to you? Kelly asked, a friend in distress. Kelly was a victim of black realtors. Just like Adriana, she trusted a charming man, and that man threw the young woman out on the street in the winter cold. And if it wasn't for the hotel staff passing by on a raid, Kelly wouldn't be alive anymore. What happened? Adriana asked personally again. Nothing. Except I don't have a place to live, and now I've lost my job. What's a job got to do with it? Because I'm ruining the school's image with my unenviable status. Adriana grinned wryly and told Kelly about her conversation with the principal. Those bastards, she exclaimed. No, Adriana sighed. It's much simpler than that. It's every man for himself. And there's nothing you can do about it. That's true, Kelly nodded. And noticing a strand of hair on Adriana's shoulder, she said, Is your hair coming out? Must be nervous. In the morning, they woke up to screaming, fire, burning. That's all they needed. The smell of burning was getting stronger and stronger, and people were running for the exits. Don't panic, don't panic, the hotel director exhorted the guests. The inn burned to the ground. Now Adriana and the other residents had only one way out. As long as Adriana had money, she lived in a hostel, but that ran out, and the young woman was forced onto the streets. No money, no place to live. The receptionist said, Well, maybe I can do some work. I'm not afraid of any work. We don't practice such things, answered the employee and defiantly began to write something in a notebook. From time to time, looking at the screen, standing in front of her laptop. Well, thank you. Adriana answered with a sigh and headed for the exit. Wait, the receptionist called out to her. You say you're not afraid of any job. There's a hospice a block away. Maybe they'll take you there to take care of the sick, for bed and board. See if you can apply there. Thank you. The young woman nodded and left the table. I understand and sympathize with you. But the staff is full, said the head of the hospice. But you have to understand. A psychology degree is good, of course, but we already have a psychologist. We can't help everyone who needs help. After all, this isn't a labor exchange. But maybe I could be a backup. Lyra insisted. There was no choice. I won't take up much space, and I'm not shy. There was a knock on the door, and the manager said, Excuse me, we don't need to work. A young and elegantly dressed man entered the office. Hello, Mason. The superintendent smiled cordially. What are you doing here? Hello, Benjamin. With dignity replied Vezit. I need to talk to you. Are you still here? The superintendent frowned, looking at the liar. I think I made myself clear. I'm sorry, the young woman said quietly and left the office. Adriana took the hallway, wondering if there was another social hotel in town. There was no money on the phone, so she couldn't monitor the city for it. Adriana was already approaching the exit when suddenly she was called by iWait. The young woman turned around and saw the same young man with whom she met in the office of the head of the hospice. Are you for me? She asked. Yes, you are. The stranger nodded with a smile. Benjamin said you had a problem. And who doesn't? Bitterly, Adriana grinned. I think I can help you, the man said. My name is Mason. You've heard, though. Well, I'd like to offer you a live-in job. You want to offer me a job? The young woman asked in disbelief. But yes, in general. But I can't pay much. It's a business problem. But food and a roof over my head are all guaranteed. Frankly, it was all too good to be true, and to say I've been burned twice is no joke. Maybe this is the one they're talking about. God loves a trinity. But on the other hand, there were no other options, unless she went to the street, where she actually was now. What's your name? Mason asked. My name is Adriana, answered the young woman. Adriana smiled like a singer. Well, you could say that. Adriana smiled shyly. You know what? Adriana winked. Mason, you're much prettier, really. The young woman was embarrassed. She had already forgotten that men happened to compliment women. For her, it was somewhere else in her life. So how about my proposal? Asked Mason. But you didn't tell me what I should do. Adriana pointed out reasonably. Oh yes, I'm sorry. And the thing you were trying to get hospice care for. My mother needs a caregiver. But first I would ask you to tell me what happened to you. The young woman was uncomfortable telling the story of being the victim of a con artist. So Adriana confined herself to the story of divorce, the loss of her parents, and the recognition of their housing as disputed. "Well, I think I can help you," Longman said, after listening to her story. Unlike most divorced women of the Soviet era, Betty Longman was not the least bit complex about it. She would never live with a man on the principle that he was not good, but mine. She was more familiar with the principle that it was better to starve than to eat anything. After studying for a year and a half with an alcoholic with criminal tendencies, Betty showed Ivan the door, and then she did not hesitate to file for divorce. She later learned that her ex-brother-in-law had gone to jail for burglary. "I just shrugged my shoulders, and I shouldn't have raised my son." And the rest of it was such a load of crap. Betty worked as a dispatcher at the trolley park. The pay wasn't bad, but you can't have too much money, especially if you're a divorced woman with a child. And the young woman took a second job as a hospital nurse. The young mother was exhausted, but she knew that the little mommy would not need anything. Betty cared not that the child was fed, clothed, shoe, but also about his leisure time. From the first grade, Mason went to 2 sports sections on swimming and basketball. Later, the boy became interested in chess, and of course, his mother did not neglect his computer literacy. The boy grew up erudite and well-rounded, and Betty was happy about it. Besides, she was proud of the fact that Mason Longman was a good-looking guy and enjoyed success among the girls. Betty didn't skimp on her son's entertainment either. "Mom, but this is the most expensive nightclub," shook his head when Betty presented him with a flyers for his 16th birthday, a concert by a popular band. "So, is it fun?" asked his mother. "We live once, and you had fun." "It's kind of shameful," replied the guy. "You work, live and work hard, and I have fun. Well, when to do it, if not when you're young?" Betty objected. Some of the relatives and friends of the family had told Ethan that, "Look, don't let it get you down." But it didn't. When it came time to think about education, Mason said that he decided to enter the Faculty of Economics. "In the future, I want to devote my life to business," he explained his choice. "The competition is crazy," Betty remarked. "Mother, do you really doubt me?" "No," the woman shrugged. "But as far as I know, to get into the economics department, you need goodwill and a lot of money." "Mom, I've already thought about it," Mason said. "I'm gonna work part-time." "And where are you going to work part-time?" Betty chuckled. "Where will they take you?" "I've already been hired," he smiled. "At a restaurant as a waiter." "Oh, come on. That's the truth. And if I have time, I'll work as a promoter or a courier. I could use a part-time job right now." "Well, part-time work only strongly not overwork," with a sigh, said the mother, automatically taking hold of the heart. The mother, frightened, asked Mason, "Are you feeling okay?" Yes, I'm fine." Right. Mason got a job as a waiter. It paid well, plus tips. The day ended when the last customer left, which sometimes went past 0 o'clock. After such shifts, Mason needed a truly Herculean effort not to fall asleep for lessons. On Saturdays and Sundays, he worked part-time as a promoter or handed out publications of an advertising nature. It was hard as hell, but the thought of studying economics and then becoming a businessman warmed his soul. Some people said that you don't have to study for 5 years to be a businessman. "Listen to a course on the basics of entrepreneurship and all that," said Liam's school friend Mason. "No, I want to study everything thoroughly, not grab the top." Shook his head at me. Liam, grandiose plans. 5 years of being a student flew by much faster than it seemed to Mason at first. The boy faithfully attended all lectures, took an active part in seminars and colloquiums, but he couldn't wait to get a diploma and make the first steps in business. Sometimes Mason thought that Liam was probably right, and such difficulties were really unnecessary. He knew a lot of double majors who started earning good money almost after school. However, being a perfectionist, the guy wanted everything to be, as he put it, by his wits. And here he is, a young economist, full of the most daring plans, proudly shows his mother a red diploma. What am I going to say? Betty smiled. Well done, and you deserve encouragement. What do you want? I'm a mom. I just want to get rich and take you to a fancy restaurant. No more, no less. Humorist. The parent laughed. I'm more serious than ever. This will be the best encouragement. There was no money to start my own business. Therefore, the first pressing issue was employment. For a whole month, Mason went around to organizations, but in vain. We need a candidate with experience in the field, he answered in 10 companies. The remaining 2 promised to call him. Eventually, Mason managed to get a job at a Yum grocery company, and his business took off. As soon as management had the opportunity to pay employees more, they didn't fail to do so. After a year, Mason decided to go freelance. I'm sorry to part with you, Kevin said as he signed the application. It was a pleasure working with you, too, Mason replied sincerely. But I've been dreaming of my own business since high school. Well, may it work out for you, nodded the now ex-boss. What are you going to do, if it's no secret? No, it's no secret. I'm gonna open a real estate agency. Oh, really? Kevin said respectfully. I think so too, smiled Mason. And if you need to buy, sell, or exchange real estate, I'd be happy to help. I will, laughed the manager. And good luck. Thank you. And you too, Longman replied, after which the men exchanged a firm handshake. Amcor Real Estate Agency started to turn a profit after a couple of months. Of course, it was a long way from fabulous wealth. But Mason had every reason to be proud of himself. He'd made it. And what was to come? On the day of his mother's 45th birthday, Mason handed her a luxurious bouquet of dark pink roses and said, Mom, now we'll buy you the most gorgeous evening dress we can find. And tonight we're going to a nice restaurant. How about that? Oh, Mason, but that would be expensive, Betty said. Why don't we cook something at home? We'll have guests over and remember what you once said to me in response to a similar phrase. With a laugh he asked that we only live once, so we go to a restaurant and don't argue with me. Thank goodness I can afford it now. They went to an expensive boutique and bought for Betty a stunning dress, sparkling with trips of cobalt blue and beautifully revealing her slender figure. And in the evening, mother and son went to a cozy country restaurant and sat gloriously, promised to take you out to a restaurant at least twice a year on your birthday. And on March 8th, solemnly said the son, Do you want to spoil me? With a laugh asked Betty, touched by her son's words. That's exactly what Mason confirmed. You used to spoil me. Now it's my turn. The agency still fed Mason and his staff heartily, but it wasn't enough for him. So Longman started thinking about opening a new branch, and he succeeded. Mason, Betty said at dinner one night, I was talking to Aunt Bailey today, and she asked if you could find some work for her, Michael. At the mention of his cousin, Mason snorted incredulously. How long had he remembered Michael? He'd always wanted easy money. After high school, Mason's cousin had enrolled in a technical school to study software engineering. Michael reasoned that programmers made good money. What is his truth? Except that Michael forgot about one thing. In order to earn this very good money, you must first learn and start working. As a result, Michael was expelled after the first session, and then the failed programmer tried to earn money. However, the ways of earning money did not inspire confidence and looked more like fraud. What are you doing all this fooling around? Mason once said, try to get back into tech or go somewhere else. But there's no easy money in it. But Michael wasn't interested in any reasonable arguments. He wanted it all. Fortune is fickle, shrugged his cousin. One day there is none, and the next day there will be. Why wouldn't they? Mason asked reasonably. One should be able to wait admonitively, Michael replied. And then word got out that he'd started gambling. The guy had money, and Michael said to Mason, Well, I told you, Vital. Even an amateur like me knows that you get a beginner hooked on winning first, and once they get the hang of it, They start losing. Mason grinned mirthfully. Why not? Michael objected. If you think with your head, everything will be fine. And soon Mason's prediction came true. Michael owed a large sum to some criminal authority, and the guy was in serious trouble. Aunt Valia, Betty's sister, came to her nephew and banged at his feet. Spells help a brother. I won't survive if anything happens to him. Mason helped. What's there to do? What's the ritual? He generously lent the money, noting that it was time to start earning his own money. And now, a year after this story, Michael seems ripe or desperate to find a magical way to make serious money. Can you think of anything? Betty asked. Probably, Mason replied after a little thought. But I can't guarantee fabulous money. He's got no education, no skills, and have him come back tomorrow morning. To be honest, he didn't really believe Michael would come. But he did, and he miraculously agreed to take the office manager's job. Mason had no idea what it would cost him to help him get his cousin hired. To Mason's surprise, Michael faithfully performed the duties of office manager. Growing up, Longman noted. And a few months later, Mason went to his personal account to pay the tax and whizzed out of the company's accounts more than half of the amount to pay the tax, of course enough. But what to do next? It was supposed that all available assets would be used for the development of the branch and some needs of the head office. And there was no money. Mason refused to believe it, but the truth was obvious. The missing money was clearly Michael's doing. Had he really started gambling again? Depressed, Longman thought and dialed the receptionist's number. Katya, would you be so kind as to get Michael for me? Okay, Mason shouted the receptionist. Michael came up about 10 minutes later. What's the matter? He asked. Charles, is there something you want to tell me? It was obvious from his cousin's face that he wanted to lie that he didn't understand anything. So Mason decided to take the bull by the horns. Don't let him think that being related gives Michael the right to do whatever he wants. He wants to work for his health. No, so he's Mason. He's not holding anyone back. Michael, are you playing with metal in your voice again? He asked. I'm not. But you're the one who took most of the money out of the accounts, Mason interrupted. Did you owe someone again? Michael fell silent, slurring. Is that what you needed this job for? Longman stated. You know, I can forgive anything but stealing from my own. That's called fatherland. After all, if you had a problem, you could have told me about it instead of hacking into the computer to steal company money. So now you're going to fire me. Mason nodded. I'm sorry, brother, but I can't trust you. A few days later, a police officer visited the office. Longman Mason asked the employee upon entering his office. Yes, that's me. Politely replied the office owner. What can I do for you? We've received a report that a company is running an apartment scam, said the police officer. What is this nonsense? Mason exclaimed. My company has an impeccable reputation. We've been through a lot of transactions. Yes, you should read the reviews about our firm on the internet. There's never been a scam. We'll take care of it, said the law enforcement officer. You'll have to come with us, but I cannot. Mason said in desperation. I have a meeting with a client in 20 minutes. I don't think so. The policeman grinned. The company's office will be sealed until the circumstances are clarified. The next 2 weeks were a living hell. Mason was shown several documents according to which people were transferring housing to other people. The papers were authentic and drawn up in the office of the real estate agency Comcor. Mason couldn't help but realize that apartment scams, like theft, were the work of a cousin. I should have known what he needed the job for. He berated himself. But what's the use? The important thing now was not to go to jail. Betty's health left a lot to be desired. And who but Mason would take care of her? Longman's lawyer had done a good job. He managed to get a logical forensics count, and Mason's signature was found to be forged. He was eventually released on his own recognizance. As for Michael, he lay low, and therefore it was not possible to attract him. And where's the obvious evidence of his guilt? Anyway, Mason's firm lost its sterling reputation. Clients became noticeably less, and one day Mason was forced to declare bankruptcy. It could have been worse. Mr. Longman is alive, well and free. The rest will follow. Except Mom. No matter how hard Mason tried to hide his problems from Betty, she found out. All things secret, as you know, come to light. And the earth is full of rumors. But how could it be? Her mother said in a stricken voice, "He's your brother." "Unfortunately, Mom," Mason replied with a bitter smile. "For some people, nothing is sacred. I can't get my head around it. Just a poor woman." Betty took what happened to her son too personally and became ill. She had trouble walking, talking, and caring for herself. That's why it didn't require a caregiver. Mason still had some money to spare and hired a caregiver from an agency. 3 months, he figured. And then, God willing, I'd find a decent job. Mason, as a young man who used to work as a courier promoter, he did not mind unloading railcars offered in the store as a loader. As for more monetary and stable work, her search has not yielded any results. The story of the scandal in Odessa real estate office flew all over the city, and no one wanted to deal with Mason. He was very much on the wrong side of the throat. Young but promising businessman. Maybe some of his old contacts knew Mason was innocent. But such acquaintances either did not want to compromise themselves in the eyes of other representatives of the business community, or did not want Longman, once a strong competitor, to rise from its knees. Victoria, whom Mason was dating at the time, stopped returning his calls, and because she said she loved money. "She did," said Betty, who had always disliked Vika. "She loves money," said Betty, who always disliked Vika. Money was running low and bursting. Rich realized that next month he would have nothing to pay the caregivers with. Betty, meanwhile, was quietly fading away, and the doctors only spread their hands. The result of severe stress, in one voice, said, plus not very healthy heart. The main thing is to regularly take the prescribed drugs of calmness and observe bed rest, but also appropriate care. Here, the appropriate care came into question. After all, it required an investment, and they needed something to eat as well. Mason feverishly considered his options and finally came up with one. He decided to contact the hospice, which supervised. Perhaps Benjamin will match him with a specialist who will agree to work for a moderate fee, food, and a roof over his head. He was helping us, wasn't he? But Benjamin seemed to think otherwise. "Oh, really?" the hospice director exclaimed. "I hire highly qualified people. My staff won't work for less than that." Benjamin tore off the sticker and wrote the amount for which he said his subordinates were willing to work. Mason couldn't afford it, but we can't say his trip to the hospice was in vain. "You know what?" exclaimed the master of the office. "Did you see from me?" Now the lady was coming out of her pocket and remembered the young woman whom Benjamin had apparently turned away. And I nodded. "She offered me her services for food and a corner," said the superintendent. "I don't have any vacancies. The woman is in a difficult situation. And anyway, if you are interested, you can catch up with her and offer her a job." "Thank you," Mason replied, and quickly walked out of the office, thinking that with mercy at the staff of hospices and other similar places is tight. However, if you think hard enough, you can hardly blame them for that. Police officers, ritualists, surgeons, and many others touch human grief almost every day. It's their job. And if you sympathize with everyone, it won't last long. But Longman has helped so much with this hospice that the superintendents could have come up with some variant for him. Although, in fact, he only came up with one if it was worthwhile. Mason was lucky. The young woman Benjamin was talking about hadn't left yet, and when Longman called out to her and the stranger turned around, he realized that this girl needed help. Her eyes were so beautiful, but so sad, it made the former owner of the real estate office's heart ache. But first, the business part of the conversation. The negotiations had taken place. Mason and her mother lived in a small but very nice cottage. Adriana entered the house and immediately felt like pinching herself. "Am I really going to live in this house?" the young woman thought. not believing her happiness. "Let me show you to your room first," Mason suggested. "And then I'll introduce you to your mom." "Okay," Mason nodded to Adriana. "It's just Mason," he smiled. "I'm not that old." Adriana just shrugged. The room she'd be staying in was sunny and bright, cozy and spacious, especially after the social hotel in Hosta. Adriana thought with a sigh, just what will happen next? Will it be my destiny to wander around in other people's houses from now on? "Do you like it?" asked the owner of the cottage. "Yes," Adriana nodded, wondering if he was joking. It was clear that a man who had asked for hospice care would be happy in any conditions. A room on the second floor of the cottage was something she couldn't even dream of. "Well, that's fine," Mason smiled. "Perhaps you'd like a bath." "I wouldn't say no," the young woman muttered embarrassedly. "The baths are down the hall," said the employer unexpectedly, and added in a changing tone after the engagement, "I can offer only a man's robe." "Thank you." Adriana nodded with a shy smile. "When was the last time I had such a luxurious bath?" "I thought." The young woman inhaled the scent of strawberries with pleasure. "A long time ago in another life. Just like this, in another life." "And what will this life be like?" "Let's hope that this time I'll do well. God willing, everything will work out." The water is already cold. But Adriana didn't seem to notice. She was having such a good time. But remembering why she was here, Adriana reluctantly finished her water treatment and, putting on her robe, left the bathroom. She hesitantly stopped in the middle of the hall, not knowing where to go next to her room. But Adriana would have to meet her ward. Yes, but she needed to change her clothes. So the dress Adriana was wearing was filthy, and frankly, smelled of sweat as she stood helplessly wondering where to move. Mason's lightly steamed footsteps were heard on the stairs. He said with a smile, "Thank you," Adriana replied. "Now we will eat and get to know the ward," Mason said cheerfully and explained we will eat in her room. "But let's go." Mason's mother turned out to be a thin and probably once very attractive woman. She had a kind, warm, and sincere smile. Looking at Adriana's mother, I wanted to believe that she would not be deceived in this house. What could I take from her? Adriana grinned to herself. "Well, welcome," said the woman in an affectionate and melodious voice weakened by illness. "My name is Betty Adriana." She smiled. Mother Mason was just over 50. If it weren't for the fine lines around her eyes and the corners of her lips, she might have been 40, if not less. Her long golden blonde hair, touched with gray. The woman had spent an hour pulling her hair back and putting it up high. But unlike many of Betty's peers, her hairstyle was not outdated in the slightest. "That's what Adriana," the ward said quietly. "May I call you that?" Adriana nodded. Betty said, "So Adriana, in this house, are you a guest?" Yes, and don't look at me." "So Mason told me that you were in a difficult situation, and it would be sacrilege to invite you here as a servant." Adriana looked at Mason confused, and he nodded. Yes, that's right. You'll be more of a companion to Mama than a caregiver." "Adriana, what about your sense of humor?" "Your sense of humor?" "I don't know what to say," the young woman said thoughtfully. 4 years ago, I would have said that I have a great sense of humor. I'm a psychologist by training. But now, the psychologist was a little surprised at Mason. "Yes," she sighed. "And worked in your specialty." "Worked," nodded Adriana. "In another life, you're right." Longman suddenly smiled, winked at her. It was indeed in another life. "And do you know why?" "Because there's a new life waiting for you now. And it's going to be better than the old one." "You don't believe me." And Adriana believed him for some reason. "Adriana, you know what I've been thinking?" Asked Mason at breakfast. Betty was still asleep, and they had breakfast in the kitchen. Adriana raised her head and looked at him questioningly. "You will be my mother's personal psychologist," Mason said. "Does she need a psychologist?" Adriana asked. "We all need a psychologist from time to time," Longman said thoughtfully, clearly thinking about something else. Mason was going to deliver the next batch of advertising papers and was dressed very democratically, a t-shirt and a tracksuit. Adriana remembered Longman talking about business problems, but didn't dare to ask what he was doing. Mason had been forced to sell this car because of debts and now walked to the office, thinking that the bus courier's job came in handy. In addition, the bicycle provided by the advertising agency is also not bad and for health and fun, thought Mason. He always knew how to find a plus in everything. "Hello, Julia," greeted Mason, the employee of the advertising agency. "Are you as charming as always?" "Thank you." Mason smiled at the girl. It's nice to hear a compliment early in the morning, and even from such an interesting man. "It's not a compliment, but the truth." Longman smiled. Julia was indeed a marvel. How good? A petite brunette of about 23, with sly brown eyes and long lashes. "Still nice. Not without coquetry," replied the employee and proceeded to work matters. "Here are your newspapers. Have a good working day." "Thank you." Mason put a pile of advertising newspapers on the trunk and rolled towards the front of the work entrusted to him. On the way to the station, the former businessman thought about the nurse he'd brought into the house to care for his mother, more precisely, about the personal psychologist. And to be perfectly honest, Mason did not see Adriana as an employee. Adriana was undoubtedly very beautiful. Mason, of course, had no way of knowing what the young woman had looked like before she'd found herself in her predicament. But she seemed to be in Adriana's favor. She had her passport with her, and Longman knew that Lilia was 27, a year younger than himself. No, Adriana didn't look older than her age, although in her position that would make sense. It was just that those stunning green eyes seemed to belong to a woman in her 40s, if not older. The eyes of a wise and damaged woman. That was the definition that came to Mason's mind. Generally, the former owner of real estate agencies would prefer a caregiver in the age of years, so it is from 45. But in his situation, he didn't have to choose. As long as she was clean and responsible, Mason decided, and rushed to catch up with the girl. Adriana made quite a positive impression on Longman, and her psychology degree was a plus. Suddenly, Mason realized he wanted to do something nice for Adriana. Only this. As he thought about it, he almost missed the right street and mentally chuckled. Hadn't you fallen in love with Longman and remembered that airplanes came first? And the girls. Then Mason went about his cursory duties. "Betty, what can I make you for breakfast?" Adriana asked with a smile. "Don't fuss," the girl said affectionately to her mentee, and then realized, "Oh, it's okay that I'm on a first-name basis. It's okay. So what can I make?" Coffee and a couple of cheese sandwiches would be quite enough. With a slight wave of her hand, Betty replied, "And let's go to my place for a chat." Adriana replied well, and went into the kitchen. "Adriana, I hope we haven't offended you in any way?" the landlady asked with genuine concern. "Not at all, no," Adriana exclaimed. "You just saved me. You gave me a roof over my head." "No work," Betty objected. "Are you our guest?" "Why should I be? It's not like I'm related to you." "No relation," the woman nodded. "But sometimes relatives are worse than strangers. There was a story in our family that got Mason into business trouble. But Mason will tell you about that, if he wants to, of course." "Well, Adriana, unfortunately, kinship doesn't matter. Let's not be sad." Adriana: "Yes, I realize, of course, that the Mason robe suits you, but maybe we can find you something from my closet." "Oh, this is so uncomfortable." "What else?" "Betty, it's much more comfortable than walking around the house in a man's robe." And the woman laughed merrily. Adriana jumped in, and within a minute they were laughing until they cried. "So let's get to the makeover," Betty winked, getting out of bed. "Oh, I'm getting a little dizzy." "So maybe later?" Adriana asked fearfully. No, it's okay," the employer's mother reassured her. "I'll just sit for a few minutes, and the check and everything will be fine." In the end, Adriana became the owner of a pretty soft blue polka dot dress. Sewn from you goat-like cotton blouse with a floral brand in bed colors, a pair of summer skirts, and a long robe of fine silk. Well, that's quite a change, Betty said approvingly as the young woman put on the blouse and skirt. You're a fashionista, aren't you? Adriana said with a smile. Of course, Mason often spoiled me with beautiful clothes, she answered in a satisfied voice, and with a sigh, she added when he had the chance. Well, God willing, things will work out for him, Betty said the young woman. You don't think? I can do a lot of things and I'm willing to do all the cooking in the house, clean the windows, wash. Adriana jokingly wagged his finger at Betty. I said you're our guest first. We'll figure out the rest as we go along. When Mason finished delivering the ads, he went to the office, and then it hit him. Why didn't I think of that before? He chastised himself as he drove up to the store that sold clothes. Adriana had nothing to wear. He remembered, unassuming. Most likely issued in a social hotel dress, Adriana, and sighed heavily. What a pleasure it would have been for him to put her in his Peugeot right now and drive her to the boutique. But, alas, the blessed times when Mason could afford it were behind him. And this one you drop, sternly, he ordered himself. What are your years? You're not even a day old. And you'll still have that kind of decadence. In the meantime, girls, my dear, how much does a dress like this cost? Longman asked the two young saleswomen, taking off his sunglasses. No matter how much Mason convinced himself that there's no such thing as a bad job, and the most important thing is that there is. The former entrepreneur was desperately afraid someone would recognize him. No, Longman wasn't a snob. After all, he wasn't a rich hare himself. Still, his pride prevented him from showing himself to his acquaintances, especially those in the business community, as a courier and other low-level characters. However, this store was on the outskirts of town, and the risk of being there was minimal. Mason was willing to bet that it was zero. One of the girls mentioned the price of a pretty white dress, and Mason calculated whether his present earnings would be enough for a couple of such dresses, and when he realized that it would be enough, and that there would be some left over, he said cheerfully, Well, fine, let's do it this way. I'll come and get the money in half an hour. In the meantime, you calm this down. And this one. Are you sure you're coming? Asked the second saleswoman. Mason smiled. Nice guy, she said. Yes, his girlfriend is lucky, replied her partner. Not rich, but he's like a stone wall behind him. You know, I think he's got all the riches ahead of him. Today our store, and there. And then, look, and to an expensive boutique is not far away. Mason was pleasantly surprised to see his mother and Adriana chatting and smiling at each other in the gazebo. For the last month, Betty had not gone outside, only stared out the window. Summer was just coming into its own. And it was still a little chilly in the morning, so her mother threw a poncho over her shoulders. Many of the women were carefully covered with light plaid. Betty's cheeks flushed. She hung back, looking better, and Mason thought of her and Adriana's meeting at the hospice. Nothing short of a gift of fate. I'm back. Cheerfully, he announced. And then Longman's gaze fell on Adriana. She was wearing the skirt and blouse he had bought from his mother in Thailand. She's much prettier than I thought. Mason thought in amazement. Suddenly, he felt like a classicist giving a chocolate bar to a girl he liked for the first time. How was your day? Fun, he asked. Just great, Betty exclaimed. And we got a little dressed up. Well done, Mason nodded with a smile. Adriana thought, looking at them, that such a mother-son relationship was rare. She remembered her first husband. James had undoubtedly loved his mother, but there was still no such reverent regard for her. The mother of her second husband, Adriana, did not know. William, that is, Charles, or whoever it was, said she was dead. But was that really the case? Adriana waved her head, shaking it away from her thoughts of who was responsible for all her troubles. What's wrong? Mason asked. No, everything's fine, the young woman assured him. Adriana, and I have a small gift for you, smiled Longman, taking out of the bag. Oh, really? You shouldn't have. Adriana was embarrassed, realizing that it was probably clothes. It was very much worth it. He said firmly, "You have to wear something, don't you? But I'm here to take care of your mother. Why on earth would you give me gifts? She doesn't trust men." Betty sadly realized and decided to take matters into her own hands. "Adriana, I understand that you are uncomfortable accepting gifts from a man you know," she said, "but you can accept these things against a future paycheck." "But of course," Mason exclaimed gratefully, looking at his mother. "Well, if so," nodded Adriana. "That's settled," summarized Betty. "Now let's go to lunch, Mason." "Adriana, and I made these patties. They're delicious. She's a magician." "I want some," smiled my son. "Let's go." What's the point? A week passed. The atmosphere in the Mason house was improving day by day, and it couldn't be happier. This girl was a ray of light for us, Mason thought one day. And that word fit Adriana like no other. Betty was alive and seemed to be on the mend. The house was always filled with good food and exemplary cleanliness. Sometimes Mason felt like Adriana was a member of the family. He thought about her a lot in general, until he finally realized he was in love. "Adriana, I think I like you," said Betty once. "What makes you say that?" "Adriana, these things don't happen for some reason," said the mentee, who had become a real friend to Adriana over the days. "I am Mason's mom, and I can feel his every mood. You can't fool a mother's heart. When you have children of your own, you'll realize that." Adriana sighed heavily at the mention of children. After all, that was essentially where it had all started. Or had it? After all, James had turned out to be a philanderer. So whether they had a child or not wouldn't change anything. Sooner or later, his nature would come out. One way or another, it happened the way it did. Adriana, and she woke up thinking, "I probably shouldn't have mentioned it," Betty said thoughtfully. "It's all right, isn't it?" the woman asked incredulously. Adriana nodded, smiled, and squeezed Betty's hand, whispering, "Really?" The girl's lyrics were broken by the cheerful voice of Mason. "Why don't we have a picnic, Chuck? The weather is marvelous. The soul is in need of a party. And there's an occasion." "What's the occasion?" Mother inquired. "I got a bonus today," he boasted. "So it's a good idea." "Isn't that a great idea?" Betty said approvingly. "Adriana, what do you think?" "I like it too," the young woman smiled. "But then I'm off to the store for wine and meat." "Adriana, how do you feel about wine?" They'd already switched to you, and each was pleased to note that it was more comfortable that way. "Wine? I don't know, honestly. I'm not a wine drinker. But I wouldn't say no to a good glass of wine. No one offers you a bad one." Longman laughed. Mason returned half an hour later with 2 rather weighty bags of food, besides 2 bottles of red wine, and he had already bought huge pink tomatoes, cucumbers, greens, cherries, and a bunch of bananas for the marinated pork kebabs. "Wow!" exclaimed Betty. "Mason's having a worldwide feast. Well, the whole world can wait. But for 2 lovely ladies, I'd be delighted." While Mason grilled kebab vetua cut vegetables, and Adriana closed the table in the gazebo, the young woman suddenly had a strange feeling that they were family. What was it that made her very confused? It even seemed to Adriana that Mason and his mother might be eavesdropping on her thoughts. It would cross her mind, wouldn't it? She chided herself. Who am I to them as a servant? And just plain bad people. "The shish kebab is ready," Mason reported to the ceremony, and the women sat down at the table. They ate the bottom kebab, the aroma of which spread throughout the neighborhood, drinking wine and chatting about all sorts of things, and really looked like a friendly, cheerful family. After the 3rd glass, Fetua said, "I think I'll go." "Wow, I'll walk you out." Adriana perked up and took the woman under her arm and led her into the house. "Fetua, maybe I should stay with you," Adriana suggested. No, Adriana. I'm just tired of sitting around. I'd just like to take a nap. I'll be as good as new." You go sit with Mason and socialize. All right, the young woman replied. But if you need anything, be sure to call. Promise. I promise, Vetua smiled weakly. Go on, girl, you could use a little fun. Mason too. Adriana left the room, and Betty looked at her and smiled at her thoughts. Is everything okay? Mason asked when Adriana returned to the gazebo. Your mom says she's just a little tired, she said. Longman nodded and said field wine to himself and Adriana. Mom, how much she's been stretching for me for as long as I can remember her. All she did was fight to make sure I had everything I needed to have a normal childhood. Can you imagine? My mom worked 2 jobs, never went on vacation, took monetary compensation, and ended up compromising her health. I'm glad I had the opportunity to pamper my mom. When she turned 45, I took my mom to a restaurant. You should have seen her eyes. Mom looked at me like I had given her the whole world, and it was worth it. Adriana listened without interrupting and thought what wonderful people they were and how lucky I was to have met them. Once again, she thought. Great, she said aloud, smiling with just her eyes. Too bad. I didn't have that opportunity. My parents left so early, and while they were alive, I had problems. I'm really sorry. With sincere regret, answered Mason, and suddenly covered Adriana's hand lying on the table with her own. But you know what I think? Right now, your parents are looking down from heaven and are happy that your life is getting better. I'm sure you're going to be fine. Let's drink to that. They drank and clinked glasses on high stems. You know, I was set up by my own cousin. With sadness in his voice, Mason said, Is there such a thing? It happens. He sighed. In fact, that's why I got in trouble in business, and in a big way. But never mind. As they say, we'll live. We won't die. And the world is full of opportunities. We'll fight for our place in the sun. Adriana, why don't we take a little walk around the village? It's very beautiful here now. I don't know if that's comfortable. The young woman hesitated. What if Betty needs something? What's the phone for? Yeah, we won't go far. We'll walk around the neighborhood and back. All right. Adriana gave up. She suddenly felt like going for a walk herself. I'll just check on Betty. Okay, Mason replied with a smile, touched by such reverence for their mother. The street was beginning to blow its nose, and Adriana felt a little awkward walking under the arm of a handsome young man, as if they were a couple in love. They reached the huge oak trees. Beside the trees ran grass and bells. Adriana suddenly thought they were tinkling. When my mom and I first moved to the village, I used to love to come here and listen to the sound of those oaks, Mason said. It's really beautiful here. Adriana nodded with a smile. But your eyes are much more beautiful, he said quietly and put his arm around her waist and began to kiss her, first timidly and tenderly, then more and more insistently. Adriana, he whispered. Adriana, Adriana. The young woman, frozen stiff at first, then resolutely wrapped his arms around Mason's neck. It wasn't even a kiss, but a protest of 2 ravenous people against this cruel and merciless world. They penetrated each other, but it seemed to both of them that no, not close enough. I'm not letting you go anywhere. Longman whispered hotly. I really need you. Now Mason realized this was the woman he had been waiting for, and if Adriana suddenly wanted to leave, he would hold her by force. Mason knew that for sure. They should be together. Mason, don't. Adriana said quietly but firmly. It's not right. But why? I think we need to get to know each other better. And I think we already know each other enough. Longman whispered, taking her hand. There haven't been many women in my life. And do you know why? Because I've never been the type of man to go through the motions looking for the one. I only look at the ones I see as my woman. And now I know I found her. Adriana caught every word Mason said, and she wanted so badly to believe that everything he said was true. 2 failed relationships hadn't gone unrewarded. But better to do it and regret it than not to do it, and then regret it for the rest of your life. Adriana remembered the famous saying and trustingly nestled into the pocket, suddenly feeling like a kitten who found a master after a long wandering. The next day was a day off. Therefore, Mason did not need to go anywhere. At breakfast, Betty glanced furtively at her son and Adriana, and noticing the happy faces of both thought, "Lord, make these two be together." "Mom, I need to tell you something." Mason smiled. Adriana's eyes widened. Betty mentally thanked the Almighty. It looked like what she had dreamed of was becoming a reality. "Anyway, Adriana and I love each other," Mason said. "Is that true?" Betty exclaimed. "God, Mason. Yes, it's the most wonderful news I've heard in over a year. My children, I'm so happy for you." "Adriana, what about you?" "Aya." The young woman couldn't say a word with excitement. "Betty, it's true," Adriana replied with an embarrassed smile. "I love Mason." "Well, that's great. I think this case should be celebrated." "Mason, Adriana, maybe we should make a celebratory dinner." "Why?" My son smiled. "Could we?" "What do you think?" "Why not?" "Well, that's great," summed up the happy mother. The festive dinner was lively. Mason joked a lot, laughed a lot, and gallantly courted his girls, as he called his mother and his favorite woman. Betty couldn't remember the last time she had seen her son so happy. "I wish they were doing well," the woman thought. After all, they both deserved it. 3 months passed. September was cold. But Mason and Adriana were warmed by their love and the anticipation of happiness. It couldn't be otherwise. 2 weeks ago, Mason brought a valuable package to the office of a young company, and the man sitting in the chair exclaimed in amazement, "You're Mason Longman." Mason was confused. He had already forgotten about his former, but belonging to the business crowd. He was terribly embarrassed to appear before a businessman in such a disadvantageous position. But it had already happened. "Yes, it's me," he admitted. "You have no idea how long I've been looking for you," said the owner of the office, shaking his hand as he stood up sharply from his desk. The young man was hardly more than 25 years old, and to Mason's amazement, he looked at the courier as if he were a celestial. "In short, I need a man like you," the man said more slowly and very seriously. "I, Jacob, am the head of this company. We are engaged in manufacture of doors and windows." "Interesting. He's still asking," thought Mason, who had given up hope of catching on to any possibility. "Well, yes, he did," Mason replied discreetly. "But doesn't it bother you that no company has wanted to do business with me in the last year?" "Oh, come on," Jacob said cheerfully. "Anyone who is aware of the situation knows where it comes from. Besides, you know, in business as in war, if you don't do it, you do it. And if someone has slipped into a puddle and can't get up, only 1 out of 10 will lend a helping hand." Mason thought with a sad chuckle. Yes, the count was in the tens. On the whole, however, he liked Jacob. He reminded Mason of himself at the beginning of his career. Longman suddenly remembered Jacob, whom he respected as a man and as a professional. So this kid is his son. Well, a worthy successor. Jacob offered Mason a cold juice, after which the men, without delay, discussed the details of cooperation. It had proved fruitful, thanks in large part to Longman. "I'm proud of you," Adriana said when she heard that her lover was back in the fold. "I always knew you would do well," Betty exclaimed, hugging her son. The lovers sat in the restaurant waiting for their order. Mason never tired of admiring Adriana. In the last 3 months, she had gotten prettier. Adriana had a striking appearance, so she hardly used makeup. A little mascara, eyeliner, lipstick, gloss, peach new color of her luxurious brown, and hair Adriana tucked into a high hairstyle and decorated with studs with rhinestones. A diamond like that needs a luxurious setting, Mason thought, looking at her with the loving eyes of a caregiver. But isn't he an idiot? Though, admittedly, she did her job as a nurse with an A+. That's right, that's right. Betty was on the mend, and there was no hint of ill health, and the offer of cooperation Mason regarded as the final chord in the series of troubles. However, that was not all. For Adriana also found a job. Now she is in office, a manager almost by specialty. After all, communicating with people implies a knowledge of psychology. The waiter brought some kind of cold dessert, on top of which an intricate composition of strawberries or mint poems was painted. "Try it," smiled Mason. "I'm not much of a dessert person, as you know. You, on the other hand, have a sweet tooth." Deliciously approved. Adriana pinch off in desserts with a spoon a piece of mass, resembling not then mousse, not then ice cream. And it's beautiful to eat. It's pathetic. But you eat it. The young woman stabbed, and for dessert on a fork, a berry and whisked. Under one of the juicy berries was a wedding ring. What do you think? Adriana nodded, and the young woman's eyes sparkled. "Aren't you forgetting something?" asked Mason. "No, I haven't forgotten," Adriana laughed. "Mason, for God's sake, this is the 10th time you've asked me that. It's just that I'm a very much in love young man," raised a finger in the air, and grabbing the new bride in an armful, began to kiss. "Don't mess up my hair," Adriana jokingly pleaded. During their banter, Mason's purse and all its contents fell at their feet. Adriana said with a laugh, "And someone's going to ask me for my passport. Where's yours?" "My bad," said the happy groom-to-be. "Now I will correct this oversight." Mason's cell phone rang, and he answered it and whispered to Adriana, "Not as a favor, but as a friend. Please come up to my office. My passport is in the top drawer." Adriana ran up the stairs with a smile, thinking that the image of a businessman suits Mason very well. "He's cool," she thought lovingly. Adriana opened the top drawer of Mason's desk. Suddenly, her gaze fell on a document lying on the desk. Actually, not even a document, but a stamp with a picture of an apartment and the inscription Realtor Agency Maker. It seemed to the young woman that she had definitely seen this seal, and the name of the company is familiar to her painfully. And no wonder, because it was thanks to the firm that Adriana had become homeless. "Oh God," she whispered, covering her mouth with her hand. "What is this?" Further, Adriana was afraid to think. The truth was obvious. What to think now? She thought frantically. I won't be able to look him in the eye. Though who should be ashamed of him or me? When Adriana came downstairs, Mason was still on the phone. He smiled at the sight of Adriana, but when she threw at his face the passport and document found on the table, I ran my eyes fearfully. "Excuse me, I'll call you back in a couple minutes," said he to the caller, and rushed off after Adriana late. When Longman ran outside, his favorite woman was already getting into a cab. At that moment, Mason berated himself for buying a house next to a parking lot. What was the use? He was more interested in another question: what fly had bitten Adriana? Apparently, it was the title deed to the apartment of one of the firm's longtime clients. She needed a certificate, and the woman's representative had gone out to Mason. Mason sank powerlessly onto the couch. He seemed to realize what the matter was. After all, Adriana had said that her parents' housing had been found to be in dispute. She probably thought the name of my agency sounded familiar. Did Michael have something to do with this? "Jacob, I have a favor to ask of you," he said as soon as he stepped into Jacob's office. Then, 2 weeks ago, Jacob asked Mason to become a partner. And the best part was that they had become friends. "What's the matter?" Jacob asked. "Mason, is something wrong? You're not wearing your face." Jacob spoke to Longman, trying to sound calm. "I was wondering if you could run me through an old deal." Details later. Mason was strangely thoughtful, looking over the report Jacob had provided. Mason had nothing to do with it at all. "Then what's the matter?" "So did you apply?" Betty asked her son, who had returned from work, and noticing the absence of her future daughter-in-law, asked, "Where is Feroshka?" Adriana interrogated the son, wishing to prolong the time. "Ah, Adriana. And she went on business. Well, all sorts of wedding troubles. You know. Mason, are you all right?" Betty asked cautiously. "Something must be abnormal." Mason smiled tautly. Mason, I've known you for over a quarter of a century, said the wise and perceptive woman. And I know your every mood. So you don't have to tell me. Mom, she left quietly, Mason said. That's it, said her mother. But what happened? Just so I know. In despair, he exclaimed, feeling humiliation and terrible shame. Maybe you hurt her in some way. You see, son, sometimes we women get offended, and you men don't understand. What's the matter? Mom, what are you talking about? Mason shook his head. But you've seen me dusting Adriana off. True, I had one thought. But it didn't pan out. What kind of consideration? I told you it didn't work out. But you did. Meanwhile, Adriana sat on a bench at the Walk of Fame and thought, now I won't believe any man. They're all the same. Adriana. She heard a sympathetic female voice. Adriana slowly looked up and saw a pretty, young, expensively dressed woman who didn't immediately recognize Kathy. Standing next to her former classmate was a stroller with a baby in it. Kathy exclaimed in surprise to Adriana, "What a meeting. I see you have a baby married." Kathy lowered her head. "No, that didn't work out. Remember Benjamin, the guy I was dating when Kathy wasn't finished?" But Adriana understood perfectly. Yes, she nodded. I remember. So sighed the classmate. As soon as he found out I was pregnant, he immediately backed off. Stupid, really stupid, Kathy agreed. He didn't even realize what happiness he was giving up. My daughter is so cute. Yeah, well, that's his problem. How do you look? Fine. By the way, I'm the one who sighed at Adriana. And I'm back on the street. I have a good job, but no roof over my head. That's the way it is. Yeah, Lucky is drowned. You know what? Why don't you come to my place this time? No fools. We'll grieve over a woman's unfortunate fate together. Sounds pessimistic, but there is still no choice, Adriana sadly stated. Churchill. I'm so embarrassed that I asked you out of the apartment guiltily, said the classmate. Don't. Reed shook his head. After all, it's your apartment and your personal life. You fought for your happiness as best you knew how. And whoever remembers old times must be the one who gets the eye. You're a saint, Kathy said thoughtfully. Not at all, said Adriana. It's just that most often a problem makes us look at the situation from a different angle. That's the way you want to look at it. But it's not right, Kathy said thoughtfully, listening to her classmate's story. Is he really such an idiot to put a document on the table and then ask you to bring him a passport? Something doesn't add up. But Adriana shrugged. Maybe he'd forgotten the documents were on the table. Maybe so, nodded Kathy. What's the name of the real estate office? Mason wrinkled his nose. Adriana replied, I'll never forget it. Oh, really? No, that can't be right. It's Mason Longman. Player. Either you've got it wrong, or it's not that simple. Yes, Mason Longman was one of the most honest businessmen. Benjamin knew him well. There's a lot of ambiguity there. And there are rumors that his cousin set him up. Longman's innocence was proven, but the real culprit was never found. Well, I mean, he's known. But to this day, no one knows where he is. Lyra froze. She suddenly remembered how Mason had once blurted out that his cousin had set him up. But of course, that had been on the memorable night when she and Mason had first kissed. So it really wasn't Mason's fault, Adriana thought. Miller, I think you two should talk, Kathy insisted. But you're good too. You ran away without joining forces. Well, what was I supposed to do? Nail him to the wall. I could have done that. At least I'd know the truth. Oh, Kathy, I don't know what to think or believe. Adriana sighed. I don't want to believe it, but it's too simple. And being wrong twice about a man is also, you know. There was a baby crying in the next room, and Kathy went to her daughter. So Adriana said to her classmate about 20 minutes later, like I said, you can live. I got room for everyone. Plus, it's more fun with just the two of us. But personally, I think you should just explain yourself. Yeah, well, I can't advise you on that. You're on your own. A wounded bird. Not true, Adriana thought. Do you have someone to live for? It had been a month since Adriana had moved in with Kathy. The classmate was working remotely. Adriana had quit her job at Mr. Jacobs' firm to take care of the baby. The classmates supported each other as best they could and took turns taking care of the baby. How lucky is she? She thought. She stroked the pads of her fingers, pink, velvety cheeks. After all, she has a child, and I'm not lucky. Kathy had offered a classmate to be Lisa's godmother, and Adriana had been honored. I feel a little dizzy, she said as she walked out of the church and felt nauseous. Maybe it's the smell of incense, the new mom suggested. I get like that sometimes. And Kathy looked at Adriana and noticed you looked pale. Not sick. You know, Kathy, I haven't been feeling well since this morning, she remembered. That's the last time I've ever been sad. Adriana, what else? When was the last time you had one of these cases? Girls, can we get in the car already? The woman, Kathy's mother, pleaded. I'm tired. Me and Lisa squinted. Mom, wait, Kathy waved Kathy away. What do you mean, what business? I don't get it, Adriana. What do you mean, what? Did your friend pull her eyes out? Our once-a-month ladies thing. Wait, what are you saying? That's exactly what I'm saying. Kathy nodded triumphantly. No, Adriana thought for a moment. Of course, I would like it very much, but alas, we have tried for too long, but to no avail. And the doctors did not give any favorable prognosis. Well, my dear, I can name more than one couple who, having already despaired of conceiving, eventually became parents. But why guess? Go to the women's health clinic tomorrow. But let's get in the car. My mom's gonna eat us out of a birthday dinner. Congratulations, Mommy. You're 7 weeks pregnant, smiled a pretty red-headed woman about 35 years old. Are you sure? Adriana asked, confused. It's just that I haven't been able to get pregnant for years. And this? Well, my dear, I've been working for years. I know how to recognize pregnancy. The gynecologist laughed for once. So run along, make your husband a celebratory dinner and tell him the news. Yeah, I will. Thank you. That's a good one. I thought Adriana's marriage wasn't working out. And then there's a relationship that didn't. And here you are. You do realize you owe me an explanation now, don't you? Kathy exclaimed. I'm not one for innuendo. Adriana realized she'd done something stupid, but it was too embarrassing to go to Mason with her tail up and say, "Oh God," and that would make her think I was trying to tie the baby down. Adriana thought with horror. Lyric, you've got it written all over your face, laughed Kathy. I bet. Right now you're thinking about the fact that it's not proper for a decent woman to tie a man to a child. Adriana only grinned. A shrewd friend, she thought. Adriana, answer me one question, yes or no. Do you want to be with Mason? But no, well, yes or no, Kathy reminded her. Yes, Adriana answered and lowered her eyes. That's what you should dance from. And dance how? I mean, what to do. The answer is obvious. Come and repent Mason on. Or rather, find out what's what. Well, if he's guilty, does the fact that he got off somehow mean nothing? Then Mason had money, connections. Red. Honestly, I want to believe in Mason's innocence, but I'm afraid of being fooled again. I don't understand your position, for the life of me. Kathy shook her hands. But even if you suspected him, you could have told him openly. What's the point of leaving in English? I don't even understand it anymore. While I was telling Adriana and Kathy, there's something else. Something else. Yeah, you're a real piece of work. But what have you got? Nothing criminal, I hope. No, I shook my head. Not on my part anyway. Anyway, I hid from Mason that I'd been victimized by a con man. After James, I remarried, and my hubby Igor got me an apartment. He turned out to be a marriage and apartment scammer. Now that's interesting. Something tells me, well, it's worth looking into. I've got an idea. What is it? Adriana's interested. Adriana's later. Kathy was not a woman who was lucky in her personal life. Though which way to look at it, she was flamboyant, spectacular. On her account was a lot of Maisonneuve, including with a rather enviable fiancé, but with a serious relationship as it did not add up. But what cannot be taken away is a crowd of admirers. So why not take advantage of the connections? So where is it so beautiful, if not a secret? Adriana inquired. When Kathy undressed in an exquisite outfit, the color of ripe cherries with an asymmetrical muzzle hem and one sleeve, concentrated on doing a luxurious makeup. The secret was gone. Kathy, and clutching the scrap, expired sale, hurried to the exit, where a cab was waiting for her. Kevin seduce. Kathy smiled at her beau, who was MIA. I'd like to bring up one not-so-old story. Remember the real estate agency scandal? Kevin and Kathy were sitting in a small, cozy restaurant styled after a hunting lodge. For Kevin, it was a date he'd spent a third of his paycheck on. For Kathy, it was a business meeting. Although how do you look at it? Well, hummed Kevin, who had been long ago and hopelessly in love with Kathy. A very ambiguous case. Yes, and the culprit turned out to be multifarious. This is it, she thought excitedly. I think I'm on the right track. You mean in an innocent voice? Kathy asked. That's what I mean. The suitor smirked, looking at her with loving eyes. Mason Longman was framed by one Michael Macadam, his cousin. But that's not even the point. This same Macadam goes by several first and last names. Bingo. Kevin, I love you. Merlot echoed Kathy and sat up to her admirer and kissed him on the cheek. Kevin bloomed. The next day, Adriana sat in the restaurant waiting for her friend. Kathy was indecently late, and she had already pulled out her phone to call her friend. Hi. She heard an unfamiliar baritone and nodded in surprise. Hi. Complaint about Adriana. And not being able to think of anything better to do, she added. I was expecting Kathy. Kathy will be Kathy, nodded Longman. In the meantime, Mason took out his smartphone and entered the gallery. Adriana, do you know this man? He asked, opening the photo in front of him. I do, stunned. Adriana said, This is William, my second husband. I'm sorry. I didn't tell you that he's the reason I ended up on the street. Why didn't you tell me about him? I was ashamed, she admitted. Ashamed, Mason repeated. In the meantime, if you had told me about it right away, but ideally, you would have mentioned the name of my firm. There wouldn't have been the misunderstanding that happened between us. Yeah, well, whatever. It's just a pigeon. This guy's real name is William Michael Macadam, and he's my cousin, or was he? I have no idea what's happened to him now, or if he's even alive. I wouldn't be surprised if he isn't. With his penchant for adventure and card games, when I reported him to the police, they instantly told me he was also known as Charles Dolgov. Adriana whispered, maybe, smoked, and threw Adriana's cell phone. Notify the owner of the message on Messenger. The young woman smiled. It was a message from Kathy. Don't forget to tell him the important thing. A friend had written. Easy for her to say, Adriana thought. She had to do it anyway, though. Mason. Yes, love my charming. Smiled Longman Rim Things, taking Adriana's hand. There's something I need to tell you. I'm listening to you carefully. I must. Oh my God. I've been looking forward to this. And now this. What's the matter? Mason laughed. You think you were hiding some terrible secret from me. In a way I am. Adriana nodded, and then she blurted out, I'm pregnant. Is it true? Longman exclaimed happily. No, I was joking. The young woman pretended to buy us. Ask me if I'm sure it's your baby. No. Mason laughed. I'm certainly not gonna ask that. I'm as sure of you as I am of myself. Kevin and Kathy approached them. They're in cahoots. Adriana gasped. That's exactly what Trinity laughed back. Don't forget Lenka. You have to catch the bouquet. It's probably the 10th time, Kathy reminded me. Still, if it wasn't for me, there wouldn't be a wedding. You're my Cupid." Adriana smiled, hugging her friend. "I remember everything, but to tell you the truth, I don't see the point of it. Kevin has enough on his plate as it is. He's going to propose to you not today, but tomorrow." "I don't know," serenely smiled her friend and part-time witness. "But I want everything to be according to tradition. Adriana, I love you." They heard Mason's voice and looked out the window in friendship. Adriana sent an air kiss to her spouse and Mason waved. "You know," Kathy said seriously to the happy bride, "Mason once told me that from now on, a happy new life awaits me." "And he's right." Cheerfully, Kathy continued and winked. "But what's forward to the new life?" "Yes," replied Adriana with a smile. At that moment, the young woman was more confident than ever that all the hard trials were behind her and her life was finally on a white streak. After all, this time, she had the most wonderful man in the world by her side.